Ansal was once the undisputed king of iron, a titan reborn after crushing the heaviest world record in human history. But fate had a weird sense of humor as he woke up in a strange land, completely surrounded by a sea of chickens. Suddenly, a system prompt flickered in his vision, announcing that these birds were packed with 68 kilograms of pure, unadulterated protein. For a legendary bodybuilder like Ansal, that was basically a formal invitation to dinner. He obliterated the nearest bird with a single, devastating punch and immediately lunged at the rest of the flock, treating them like nothing more than a walking afternoon snack. After a massive feast, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the water and nearly lost it. He had transformed into a scrawny, pathetic weakling. Fueled by pure, gains-induced rage, he ripped a massive log right out of the soil and started repping out squats. Before this ice-sky madness, the world of sports had stood still just to watch his legend grow. Nobody could fathom his raw power. Ansal lived and breathed the gym, obsessed with becoming the first human to bench 10 tons. Our muscle-bound hero takes a deep, grounding breath before attempting a lift that defies the laws of physics. With his lungs filled to burst, he readies his body to explode with sheer, kinetic force. Ansal begins the grind, slowly prying the astronomical weight off the platform. The high-grade steel bar starts to scream and buckle, unable to handle the mountain of pressure he's exerting. But right as he reached the absolute peak of his prime at 17 years old, the unthinkable happened, and his world came crashing down. The poor guy dropped the iron and clutched his chest, his heart likely blown out from all those special supplements he'd been popping. His massive frame hit the floor, cold and lifeless. The crowd screamed for a medic, but one look at his glazed eyes told them the soul had already left the building. The protagonist finally blinked his eyes open to the sky, realizing he had blacked out again. The doctor's warnings about his heart echoed in his mind. He now finds himself with an insane new cheat code. His muscle growth potential is officially limitless. Our boy is well aware that most girls find muscle monsters a bit much, but he's also gained the god-tier ability to control every single fiber of his body. He's been gifted Hawk, Eye, and a passive Combine buff. Suddenly, his stomach let out a roar. The man needed his macros. Ansal looked around and realized he was being swarmed by some seriously hideous-looking chickens. The ugly things were pecking at him as if he were a piece of corn. The poor guy bolted upright in a panic, scaring off those feathered monstrosities with his sudden movement. Ansal's last clear memory was of him defying gravity with a world record lift. His Combine skill kicked in automatically, cooling his brain before he could spiral. It was a good thing, too, because the world he was looking at was a far cry from his home gym. Slowly, the boy starts to put the pieces of this puzzle together, and he reaches the only logical conclusion. He must have ended up in hell. He figured since he'd eaten a small army's worth of chicken in his past life, these birds were back for revenge, and they were massive. The birds kept pecking at his face relentlessly until he snapped, delivering a swift right hook to the nearest chicken's head. Our hero was already in a foul mood. His body was screaming for a protein fix. The moment his fist connected, something shifted in his perception. His hawk eye flared to life, instantly scanning and analyzing the nutritional profile of these oversized, feathered freaks. A mysterious system voice rang out, coolly informing him that the bird contained exactly 68 kilograms of pure protein. That magic number flipped his primal switch. It was officially feeding time. Like an apex predator from a horror movie, he pounced on the first chicken, which quickly realized it was no longer the hunter but the hunted. Minutes later, nothing was left of the poor bird but a pile of clean bones. Our protagonist let out a satisfied burp. Thanks to a makeshift campfire, he finally secured the gains fuel he was craving. Still, despite the full stomach, this strange new world had him deep in thought. He couldn't recall ever being as thin and spindly as this current body. His glorious, plate armor chest had completely vanished in a thin air. On the bright side, he had the flexibility of a normal human again, finally able to scratch his own back. This realization sent Ansal to the nearest pool of water to check the damage. The truth was soul-crushing. Every hour spent in the gym, every drop of sweat, it had all evaporated into nothingness. Even with his calm mind skill active, the sight of his new beta physique sent him into a spiral of despair. He desperately wanted to know where his hard-earned mountain of muscle had gone. Facing the cold, hard reality of his skinny frame plunged him into a pit of total apathy. His entire identity, the very thing that made him the legendary Ansal, was gone. All he could feel was a deep, burning sense of loss. In a fit of indignation, he lunged at a nearby tree, his fingers digging into the bark like iron claws. With a roar of absurd strength, he ripped the entire tree out of the ground, but he wasn't done yet. He swung the massive trunk onto his shoulders like a feather. With his core braced and his stance set, the protagonist locked in his breathing. He didn't need a map or a quest. He knew exactly what had to be done. It was time for some high-intensity, high-rep squats to rebuild his temple. Because in any world, there's one thing that never lies: the grind. At least, that's the ninja way Naruto taught him. The protagonist buried himself in a brutal training montage in the wild, and 3 months flew by. Every single day, he pushed his new vessel to the absolute breaking point. But after 90 days of blood and sweat, he realized something horrifying about his progress. He hadn't put on a single pound of muscle. He was still stuck in a small, lean body. At least he wasn't starving for macros, thanks to those ugly-ass chickens everywhere. While he was daydreaming about his next protein hit, he failed to notice a shadow looming over him. A dark, malicious aura washed over him, and the protagonist slowly turned around. He froze, his heart skipping a beat at the nightmare standing before him. A chicken that looked like it had been raised on a diet of pure radiation was ready to end his journey. The monster's talons were the size of scythes, and our boy had no choice but to haul ass as it began the hunt. He realized that his only wish in life was to be huge again, but now Ansal started to think he might have been asking for too much from the universe. The demonic rooster nearly sliced him in half, but the protagonist managed to roll out of the way just in time. It was a wake-up call. In this frail body, one clean hit from that bird meant game over. But then he saw something that hit him harder than a punch: the muscles on that bird's chest were freaking glorious, well-defined, and peak human quality. As a true muscle connoisseur, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy. He mentally critiqued the bird, thinking it must have used high-volume cable crossovers to get that kind of interpec definition. Looking at such a massive beast, the protagonist actually started to weep, realizing he'd been doing too much cardio and not enough hypertrophy. Starving for that legendary physique, Ansal came to a firm conclusion. He was not allowed to die today. As he tried to escape, a group of smaller chickens swarmed in to block his path. It looks like they're backing up the cursed rooster in this life-or-death struggle. Once again, Hawkeye flared, but the protagonist was too busy trying not to die to care about the details. He kept his legs moving, apologizing to every single chicken he accidentally trampled during his frantic retreat. The Hawkeye focused again, this time locking onto the alpha bird, and Ansal screamed that he didn't care about stats. The system chirped back, reporting that this boss bird contained a staggering 12 tons of protein. And more importantly, if he ate the breast meat, he'd unlock a rare skill: incredible muscle recovery. That was the magic phrase that instantly grabbed Ansal's full attention. He stopped being the prey in that exact moment. The mission objective had just shifted from escape to eat. Amateurs think lifting makes you big, but pros know that training just rips the fibers apart. Tapping into his hidden physical reserves, the protagonist began vaulting between the trees like a pro athlete. With the right fuel and sleep, those torn fibers grow back bigger and stronger. That's the miracle of recovery. Real growth happens during the rest day, not the leg day. And if he could slash his recovery time, our boy could finally shed this chicken body and return to his former glory. The time for running was over. It was time to cook the hell chicken that tried to turn him into a snack. The beast lunged with its beak, but Ansal dodged, letting the bird smash its head into a solid tree. Knowing the god-tier reward waiting for him, there was no way Ansal was letting this opportunity slide. As he flexed his muscles with violent intent, the system detected a surge of energy that far exceeded his current stats. Immediately, a prompt appeared, asking if he wanted to break his limit and deactivate his contraction control. The restrictive shackles on his power have finally been shattered. In an instant, our hero's arm swells into a mountain of pure, terrifying muscle. Yet, that oversized turkey from hell seems blissfully unaware of the doom about to hit it. Locked and loaded, Ansal readies a world-shattering punch with his newly buffed limb, swinging his fist like a colossal iron wrecking ball. He delivers a strike so massive it shatters the demonic bird's beak into splinters. Right then, the creature realized it had made a fatal mistake, and there was no coming back from this. The shockwave was so brutal it left the monster's entire body a broken, mangled mess. The system chimes in with a warning. His muscle durability has been pushed past the red line. Luckily, his contraction skill kicks back just in time for him to stabilize his body. Deflating back into his scrawny form, Ansal scoffs. He couldn't care less about fancy skills. The only thing on his mind right now is the premium protein waiting inside that beast. Giving a quick prayer of thanks for the gains, our protagonist finally hits his limit and passes out. By nightfall, he's already wide awake and feasting on the ultimate monster barbecue. As of now, he's still clueless about this world or why his body keeps fluctuating like a glitchy RPG character. And he's definitely not aware that hungry eyes are watching him from the shadows. Eerie figures begin to creep out of the darkness, and boy, do they look famished. They're lurking at the edge of the forest, drooling over the smell of cooked monster. Finally, a voice from the back tells the pack to stop acting like starving mutts. The leader groans that it's been an eternity since they've tasted fresh meat. They're all on the brink, and all eyes are fixed on a human who turned the hell chicken into a snack. It's obvious this puny human is the one currently enjoying a high-protein banquet. One brave zombie suggests asking for a bite, but the others are shaking in their boots, fearing the monster hunter. Our hero's survival instincts flare up. He knows he's got company. But instead of monsters, he sees creatures with the faces of kicked puppies, the local ghouls. And they are starving for a miracle. Activating his hawk eye, Ansal sees the tragedy. These poor guys are suffering from severe protein deficiency. He's never seen a species this pathetic before. The tiny ghoul timidly asks if he's the legendary warrior who plucked the infernal hen. Ansal casually nods, wondering if the bird belonged to someone, but the moment he confirms the kill, the ghouls erupt into a wild, jubilant celebration. The little guy explains the local politics. When a boss monster falls, everyone fights for the throne. But Ansal is distracted. These guys are so thin he's worried a light breeze might snap them in half. The little one babbles on about how the hell chicken was a brainless but terrifying tyrant. That's why they want to beg a favor from Ansal, since he's clearly the new alpha in these woods. The protagonist pretends to think about the request, mostly because he hasn't processed a single word of their tragic backstory. The little ghoul has actually repeated the whole tale 9 times already. Ansal finally chimes in. 10 reps is the perfect set, kid. His philosophy is simple. If you're going to do something, you do it at least 10 times for the burn. The poor ghouls are standing there, completely lost in his gym talk. One of them sighs and turns to leave, convinced this human is just another crazy hermit. Ansal apologizes, explaining his schedule is packed with intense muscle-building sessions. The pack begins to mope away. They're used to being treated like trash, so they didn't really expect a helping hand anyway. But then, Ansal looks at the mountain of meat and realizes he can't finish it all before it spoils. He offers them the leftovers, and the ghouls nearly faint. It's been ages since they've seen real food. They're suddenly treating him like a god for this unexpected protein charity. He hands him a massive slab of prime chicken breast. One scrawny guy tries to hoist the whole thing, but Ansal's eyes widen in horror. As a professional bodybuilder, he cannot stand by and watch this atrocity. If that ghoul lifts that weight with that terrible form, his spine is going to snap like a twig. So Ansal bellows at the creature to drop it immediately. The terrified ghoul has no idea why the god of protein is suddenly screaming at him. The protagonist warns him that lifting with a rounded back is a one-way ticket to the afterlife. He's begging for a herniated disc, and that's a sin Ansal won't allow. But the poor creature is just staring back with total confusion. That's when it hits Ansal. These stick figures have 0 gym IQ. To them, the protagonist is just shouting weird, high-maintenance nonsense. Now it all makes sense. These guys aren't just hungry. They've never been taught the way of the iron. He flashes back to a core memory from his rookie days. Man, his old teacher was a literal mountain of meat. That legend always said you only master a move by teaching it. If your gains ever plateau, start coaching. It'll force your own muscles to adapt. That was the parting gift Muscle Mountain left for him. Watching the ghouls struggle, Ansal realizes he might have found his first students. He decides to manhandle the heavy lifting for them. He tells them to eat up now, and they'll move the rest later. but he insists on starting the real work tomorrow. Even a hero needs his 8 hours of anabolic sleep. Back at the ghoul village, the tribe is buzzing with nervous energy. A massive, bloated zombie waddles out to greet our hero. He's the big boss around here, and asks if everything is to his liking. Ansal pegs him as the tribal chief, but makes it clear he didn't come here to cause a scene. The fat man beams with pride, but Ansal can't stop staring at his skinny fat physique. No muscle, all lard. He's the only overfed person in the village. He clearly has some terrible lifestyle choices. The glutton mentions he sent his scraps to fetch the rest of the meat. Ansal knows the path is treacherous and worries for the weak ones, but the chief just smirks. He thinks it's hilarious that the protagonist actually cares about those expendable weaklings. Even though they just met, Ansal already wants to bench press this bastard into the ground. The fat man sighs, saying life in the forest will be tough now that their guard dog Hell Chicken is gone. He admits they're the bottom of the food chain, and he's the only one with any real skills. Curious about the local power system, Ansal asks what kind of tricks the old man has. But the way he asks makes the chief cackle. Our hero is so clueless he doesn't even know what a skill is. Despite the system voices in his head, he's totally in the dark. Seeing this, the old man can't help but look down on the ignorant human. He calls for the scrawny ghoul who led Ansal here to step forward. The ghouls who actually brought the food are now being treated like common criminals, forced to kneel. The poor guys are trembling, having no clue what they did wrong. The chief petulantly barks that they've committed a grave sin by bringing a stranger into their midst. The fat man decides to get off his throne to claim the meat for himself, and he's carrying a massive spiked mace. It looks like he's ready to teach the weak a lesson in fear. In his world, the only law is that the small fry shut up and obey the big guy. He wanted the monster slayer as a slave, but he thinks these idiots lied to him about Ansal's power. And for that lie, he's decided to execute them on the spot. Activating his skill, the chief triples the weight of his mace and swings a murderous blow straight at his own people. Clang! Nothing. Ansal catches the hit effortlessly and asks the fat man what the hell he's doing, bullying his own kind just because they're smaller. The chief's jaw drops. He's in total shock that his lethal strike was stopped. He panics, wondering if he forgot to trigger his skill or if he just missed the sweet spot. It's physically impossible for a stick-figure human to block his weighted mace. The fat man screams that it was just a fluke, and now he'll show him the true power of a skill, because he wields a heavy-duty power that can multiply an object's weight by 10. Our hero was actually low-key impressed by the description of that power-up. Gordon started flexing, bragging that his massive mana pool lets him crank up an object's weight by 9 times. Ansal thought that was a top-tier cheat code. Full of himself, Gordon claimed his mace weighs 32 kilos, meaning at 9x power, it would turn anyone into a pancake. He dialed it up to 4x, and swung a bone-crushing strike straight at our protagonist's head. The ghouls watching from the sidelines immediately started to lose their minds in fear. But the moment the mace touched our boy, it shattered into a million pieces like a cheap glass bottle. Once again, Gordon's brain completely short-circuited trying to process the level of strength he just witnessed. The protagonist gave the skill a thumbs up, but sighed, bummed out that they had to be on opposite sides. Since Gordon's personality is basically trash, Ansal's eyes flared with pure contempt. Now, he's about to execute a simple front raise execution. Lifting the fat man by his throat like a toy, he tells him that being strong doesn't give him the right to play God with other people's lives. Realizing he's completely outclassed, Gordon suddenly decides he's a fan of peaceful negotiations. Then, Ansal hit him with the most important question in the universe. What's your SBD total, bro? Being a total couch potato, the fat man had absolutely no clue what those words even meant. The protagonist explained the big 3: squat, bench, and deadlift, the holy trinity of gains that has nothing to do with soccer legends. But it was official. None of these people had ever even stepped foot on the iron path. Ansal had to face the cold, hard truth. Nobody here knew how to lift. So, he gathered everyone to watch the fat man attempt to deadlift from the floor. They made a deal. If Gordon wins the lift, our hero becomes his loyal lackey. Ansal was even nice enough to warn the chief to watch his form, so he wouldn't snap his spine like a dry twig. Gordon smirked like he just pulled off the heist of the century, because his skill can also make things light as a feather. He managed to hoist the bar because he secretly dropped the weight to only 25%. He technically lifted 200 kilos, but for those who skipped math class, he only moved 50. Now it was Ansal's turn. Before gripping the steel, he gave Gordon a tip. Engage your glutes, man. He told the crowd to pay attention as he demonstrated what perfect, elite form looks like. But before ripping the iron off the dirt, he went through a series of dynamic stretches. Amateurs think deadlifts are a back exercise, but a pro knows the power comes entirely from the legs and glutes. After lubing up his joints to avoid an injury, he set his feet in a perfect parallel stance. Exactly shoulder width apart, Ansal puffed out his chest, locking his entire spine into a rigid, unbreakable line. Fully braced, he prepared to drag the bar up his shins, driving his heels through the very earth. As he prepared to launch the weight, Gordon tried to sabotage him by cranking the barbell's weight up to 4x. What he didn't count on was that Ansal is just a freak of nature when it comes to raw power. Our boy ripped that bar with so much explosive violence that he literally launched it into stratosphere. Every single witness was left standing there with their jaws on the floor. While Ansal beat himself up for overshooting his power and failing the control part, everyone else realized they were going to need a new barbell. Gordon couldn't even manage a comeback because he was too busy shaking like a leaf. Every ghoul in the village bowed down, begging Ansal to be their new alpha. Ansal was just standing there, wondering how a simple workout turned into a coup d'etat. Having seen the gap between them, Gordon decided to follow Ansal like a well-trained puppy. Through their chat, Ansal started to realize this wasn't just a weird dream. It was a whole new world. Legends said ice sky travelers could find a way back, but our boy refused to return home with a scrawny chicken body. He chose to stay and grind. This land is Lysa, where the law of the jungle is the only rule that matters. Gordon officially swore his life to him. Since his original name was a mouthful, Ansal just dubbed him Gordon and ordered him to show him the training grounds. Looking at the skinny ghouls, Ansal didn't expect much, but the actual gym area was even more of a dumpster fire than he had imagined. When asked about their program, Gordon admitted they didn't really have one. They just winged it. Since he was starting with a bunch of total noobs, Ansal knew the road to gains would be long and brutal. Using his new authority, he ordered the ghouls to fall in. 5 rows, chest out. The poor guys were so out of it they could barely figure out which way to face. Ansal started his first motivational speech, telling them they were tired of eating the strong's leftovers. Our boy knew exactly what they were missing to survive. It wasn't fancy weapons or strategy. They needed to get absolutely shredded. He announced that for the next 3 months, he would forge them into true warriors of the iron. It was a tight deadline, but some ghouls felt a spark of hope. They were sick of being the forest's punching bag. Ansal saw that fire in their eyes and smirked. He had something to work with. It was time for their first lesson in core stability, the dreaded plank. The poor creatures had no idea they were about to enter a world of pure, muscular agony. Ansal led by example, dropping into a rock-solid hold. And one by one, the ghouls began to mimic his form. He told them they'd start with a light warm-up, a few sets of push-ups. Nothing crazy, just a quick 100 reps to get the blood flowing. 3 hours later, the ghouls were puddles of sweat on the ground, completely gassed. A few of them were literally seeing the light and praying for the sweet release of death. Meanwhile, Ansal was already in the thousands, repping out weighted sets like it was nothing. During the set, Gordon came waddling over to interrupt him. He came to deliver a warning. No ghoul was built to survive this level of high-intensity training. Ansal simply said, 100 more reps, then we eat. But they had already ground out 700. Now, they had to hit 800 just to earn a single scrap of meat. Some were ready to give up, missing the good old days when Gordon was the lazy chief. The murmurs of rebellion started to grow as the ghouls considered quitting the program. They didn't see the point in getting stronger if all they felt was soul-crushing exhaustion. Hearing the whining, Ansal ordered a full tribe assembly immediately. Every single one of them felt like they were at the breaking point. One of them thought this was finally the call for the dinner bell. Ansal looked them in the eye and told them this loser mindset is exactly why they are the bottom of the food chain. He roared a question. Do you actually enjoy being called pathetic weaklings? They live in a world where only the fit get to live with any shred of dignity. He asked them what they'd do if their families were in danger. Would they just cry and run like cowards? He told them if they were that kind of trash, they should pack their bags now. He doesn't train quitters. But for those with the grit to finish those 100 reps, he promised them the power to protect what they love. In a flashback, the narrator asks, what makes a legendary trainer? Is it the one with the biggest biceps, or the one who knows how to break the body to rebuild it? For some, it's all about the science and the results. But the real best trainer isn't just about the numbers. It's the person who can light a fire in the hearts of the weak. And just like that, the ghouls found a second wind, pushing through the pain even without a natural drive. Screaming at the top of his lungs, Ansal told them to push like their lives depended on it. He wanted them to feel the weakness leaving their bodies so they could finally protect their own. Ansal kept the fire burning, telling them they were capable of greatness. This was the only way to rebuild their tribe and flip the script on their destiny. Fueled by pure motivation, even the extra ghouls started repping out with insane intensity. Ansal kept the energy at a peak. It was a sight to behold. Everyone was grinding while Gordon was just standing there, clutching his belly like he'd overeaten. After that burst of inspiration, the ghouls stopped complaining, much to Ansal's surprise. He ended up unlocking a new training skill, and his hawk eye evolved to level 2. 3 months of blood and sweat passed in the forest. Now, the Lizardman tribe begins their silent advance through the pitch-black jungle. The Lizardman scouts creep toward the ghoul tribe, mocking them as pathetic weaklings while they map out the terrain. They sharpen their claws, itching to raid the village and trample the ghouls once again. One arrogant Lizardman sneers that a complex plan is a waste of time since their prey is so low tier. Their goal is simple: seize the land and build a new scaly colony. But in the distance, Gordon panics and alerts our hero that a raid is coming. Ansal, however, only notices the invaders have impressive hamstring definition. He keeps his cool and barks an order. Bench press team, get into your starting positions. He tells them to lock in their breathing and brace their cores. Seriously, these ghouls must have been on a cycle of Trenbolone since they were babies. Ansal roars for them to squeeze their glutes and keep their eyes locked on the target. The ghouls advance. It's time to push past the limit. Suddenly, a rain of massive boulders begins to plummet from the sky. The lizardmen are caught off guard, getting squashed like common pests. Trapped in a rocky hell, the raiders have no clue what kind of magic just pulverized them. Ansal smirks, taking full credit for this heavy-duty tactical masterpiece. The ghouls are no longer the runts of the forest. Their physiques are now pure aesthetic art. They execute the plan perfectly as the stones keep falling, grinding the village's enemies into the dirt. The Lizardman chief realizes his entire squad is on the brink of extinction. Desperate, he spots what he thinks is a golden opening in the chaos. He figures if he takes out the boss, the ghouls will scatter. Sensing a flicker of mana from Gordon, he assumes the Fat Man is the brain behind the operation. The scaly warrior vows he'll never be humiliated by someone as flabby as Gordon. He shouts a direct challenge, calling Gordon a coward for hiding behind his men and demanding a man-to-man duel to the death. Terrified, Gordon looks to our protagonist, asking for a way out of this mess. Ansal stands there, calmly weighing the best way to handle this pest. He recalls a memory from his childhood when he had a pet iguana. Actually, it was a rare saltwater crocodile, and he used to play with it daily. That beast's jaws were a nightmare, packing 2 tons of crushing pressure. But even with that world-class bite force, the croc couldn't even leave a dent in Ansal's rock-hard, conditioned muscles. As the lizardman lunges, Ansal asks the overgrown lizard if he knows what happens to pets that don't listen to their owners. The chief feels a cold shiver, sensing that a brutal disciplinary session is about to begin. Ansal channels that old dominant energy. He calmly steps down onto the blood-soaked battlefield. The Lizardman chief thinks he's about to score an easy win. But Ansal catches him by the armpits and slams him into the ground with a devastating power takedown. The sheer force of the impact makes the poor lizard cough up a fountain of blood. And believe it or not, our boy was just getting warmed up. He mocks the lizard, asking how he expects to act tough when his warrior briefs are already ripped to shreds from the pressure. The chief completely breaks, begging for his life. Ansal remembers a documentary about showing dominance over animals. So he looms over him, radiating a terrifying aura that shatters the lizard's warrior pride. The poor guy is left shaking in the dirt, his spirit utterly crushed. Before him stands a true monster in human skin, the man named Ansal. The lizard can't even find his voice. completely paralyzed by fear as he accepts total defeat in front of everyone. Ansal realizes that the weird things he learned as a kid are actually coming in handy in this world. The ghoul tribe roars in celebration, while the lizard man leader continues to sob, begging for a real exit. He just wants to get away from this muscle-obsessed demon. Elsewhere, in a nearby town, a man welcomes a group of knights, praising the influx of talent. He tasks them with investigating why the hell chicken went extinct. This old man is the local lord, Count Sordo, and the knights swear on their honor to solve the mystery. The count watches them ride off into the distance. Once they're out of earshot, he asks his general if it's wise to trust such a big mission to these green rookies. The general tells the count to relax, despite their age. These three are legendary prodigies in the making. Leaper, the blonde who's as flighty as a bird, toys with his enemies using high-speed swordsmanship. Indar is a beast of raw power, possessing such insane strength he can cleave a man in half with a blunt blade. Together, they're basically an unstoppable cheat code. The count hopes the third member of the trio is just as broken. But the general, who's a badass woman, by the way, struggles to find the words to describe the last guy. She mentions that the three of them have been inseparable since they were kids. The two geniuses always made sure to bring the third boy along on every adventure. Deep in the forest, the trio starts hunting for clues about the hell chicken's disappearance. A sneaky goblin is perched in the branches, ready to rain arrows down on them. It watches the group, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But before it can even twitch a finger, one of the humans vanishes into thin air. Leaper teleports behind the creature and ends its life before it can even blink. However, in its death throes, the goblin managed to fire off one stray arrow. The projectile zips right toward the third member of the party. Suddenly, a whole pack of monsters emerges, surrounding them. The boy with the blunt sword smirks. It's finally time for a little stress relief. Using his dull iron, he starts tearing through the horde like a whirlwind, turning goblins into messy biological puzzles. The two prodigies make it their absolute priority to shield the clumsy one. They won't let a single scratch touch block. All the poor guy can do is stand there awkwardly while his friends turn the forest red. At the very least, he makes sure to thank them for the carry. Once the dust settles, the two geniuses rush to Block's side, apologizing for letting the monsters get too close. As they bicker over who's the better bodyguard, Block feels a bitter pang of envy. They all trained under the same master, but Block feels like a talentless loser compared to his hero friends. He's desperate to get strong and silently begs the universe for a sign or a teacher. Back in Ansal's village, the ghouls are panting, claiming they've hit their absolute limit. Our hero notes that the motivation of the average citizen is starting to flicker. Another ghoul groans that they literally have nothing left in the tank. And then there are the scaly green legs. The lizard man chief is still being forced to move. He doesn't have a choice. He's being rebooted from level 1. After the surprise training session, even the lizard men thank Ansal for the enlightenment. He just tells them a gym door is always open. As they leave, the ghouls hit a synchronized side chest pose as a farewell. The lizard men go dead silent, realizing they just got mogged into another dimension. They slink away, totally humiliated by the ghouls' superior aesthetics. Ansal watches his zombie builders and is genuinely impressed by their progress. He knows lifting tears the fibers, and sleep knits them back together bigger. But when the central nervous system is fried, the gains stop. Rest is the most anabolic tool in the shed. After 9 weeks, the ghouls hit a plateau, with their rep counts dropping by 90. To maximize the super compensation effect, Ansal grants them a full rest day. The next morning, even he is floored by the results. The ghouls didn't just grow. They underwent a full-blown evolution. They're not just wider. They've actually gained height and presence. Through Hawkeye, Ansal sees they've become elite zombie builders with single-digit body fat percentages. Now that they've built a solid foundation, it's time to crank the intensity to 11. As they prepare to prep their next meal, the little ghouls ask if they can finally go out and hunt for themselves. Ansal sees right through it. He knows they're just trying to dodge the morning leg day. But the ghouls explain they've never been able to take down a hell chicken with just their bare hands before. And now that they have rock-hard, conditioned pecs, they want to test their new power against their old nightmare. Ansal gives them the green light, figuring he can finally focus on his own heavy sets. Standing nearby, the fat Chief Gordon admits he's sweating bullets. He still can't believe his scrawny people can win. Our protagonist's mood soured instantly. He didn't take that doubt well at all. Gordon broke into a cold sweat, stammering out apologies faster than he could breathe. He'd secretly hoped the ghouls could eventually jump the hero, but he quickly realized he'd said the quiet part out loud. Ansel dropped a heavy hand on Gordon's shoulder, telling him to chill out before he had a heart attack. After all, in this world of weaklings, nobody was going to outlift the undisputed king of the deadlift. Deep in the wild, the ghoul squad kicked off their hunt, which, let's be real, was just another excuse for a hellish workout. They were grinding through weighted lunges with massive boulders strapped to their backs. Ansel watched them like a hawk, ready to bark at anyone whose form slipped even an inch. Then the rhythm broke. One of the ghouls let out a yelp and twisted his ankle. The poor guy hit the dirt, clutching his leg and groaning in pure agony. One look at his twisted foot was enough to tell the group that this wasn't just a cramp. It hurt like a beast. The protagonist stood there, calculating his next move as the entire training march was forced to pull over and stall. In another part of the woods, the talentless Block was solo leveling with his sword. He knew Leaper and Indar were battle-hungry monsters who never let a target breathe. Block was haunted by his own perceived weakness. He was desperate to stop being the burden and finally stand on his own 2 feet so his friends wouldn't have to carry him anymore. While the others were catching Z's, he was out there bleeding and sweating over his sword forms. Suddenly, a pair of hands reached out and corrected his grip. It was none other than the resident pretty boy Leaper, showing him how to actually swing a blade without looking like a toddler. Since this guy's eyes are always shut, let's call him Blinky, and Blinky felt a pang of guilt for waking his buddy. Leaper just laughed it off, calling him a lovable idiot for pushing himself so hard. He's definitely the group's eye candy. Turns out the 2 geniuses had been faking their sleep the whole time just to keep an eye on his midnight grind. Talk about true bros. They were 100 down with Block's mission to get absolutely shredded. Blinky turned beet red when Leaper gave his cheek a playful pinch, and Twink noticed his friend's face was heating up faster than a pre-workout shake. Totally missing the romantic tension, Blinky claimed it was just the pump, and Leaper swiftly pivoted the conversation. That's when the third wheel, Indar, emerged from the brush, looking like he'd been left out of a secret party. With a glare that could curd milk, Indar watched the 2 of them with suspicious intensity. Blinky insisted nothing was going on. He was just polishing his longsword when Leaper stepped in to help. To stop him from saying anything else that could be taken the wrong way, Leaper shut him up with a finger to the lips. Indar's jealousy spiked. He snapped that they shouldn't be playing around with the group's only pure member in the middle of a monster zone. Acting all passive-aggressive, Indar declared the fun was over and everyone needed to hit the hay for tomorrow's trek. He made a big show of insisting the pure one needed his beauty sleep to keep his skin looking flawless. Blinky tried to get a word in, but got shushed again. The 2 powerhouses were seconds away from throwing hands over who got to tuck him in. They finally retreated to their bedrolls, totally unaware that the forest was about to get very loud. Blinky laid there, genuinely confused why his 2 best friends were fighting over his sleep schedule. Suddenly, a lizard man was seen sprinting toward them at breakneck speed. Blinky's gut told him something was wrong, but he assumed his friends would just start bickering again. So, he tried to shut his eyes and finally get some rest. But right then, his sharp instincts caught a glimpse of movement in the brush. He bolted upright and screamed for the team to gear up. The lizard men hadn't come to fight. They had come to run. The knights drew their steel, their eyes burning with battle-ready intensity. The 2 rivals were more than ready to vent their frustration on some scaly hides. But the lizard man leader yelled at them to move. They weren't the ones hunting. They were being hunted. Behind them, a literal tsunami of chickens was charging through the trees. Those feathered freaks had gone completely berserk, trampling everything in their path. But the kicker? Even those chickens were running for their lives from something far scarier. A horde of protein-crazed ghouls, desperate to secure their daily macros at any cost. Ansel, leading the charge, was so focused on the gains he hadn't even realized he'd started a forest-wide stampede. The entire ecosystem had been flipped upside down by his bodybuilding revolution. Ansel and his elite alpha squad surged through the undergrowth. He checked in with his ghouls, asking if they were ready to scrap because, honestly, those chickens were looking way more stacked than his own team. One ghoul scoffed that the birds only had glamour muscles for show, a comment that made Ansal rethink his entire life. One of the roosters spotted a worm, but two massive oak trees were blocking its path. The bird didn't even slow down, dead set on snagging that tiny bit of protein. Instead of going around, the chicken engaged in full-body muscle contraction. It literally vaporized the trees, shattering the trunks just to eat a worm. That's the terrifying power of a bird. With a brain smaller than a single atom, but pecs like steel plates. The ghouls watched the destruction and felt their confidence take a serious hit. But one brave soul stepped out from the pack. He marched up to the nearest standing trees, determined to prove that his 3 months of hell training were worth something. He tried to mimic the chicken's raw, explosive power. The rest of the squad held their breath, waiting for the forest to tremble. When the trees didn't even budge, he panted that he just needed a minute, but Ansal told him to take 3. That particular move isn't a bench press. You got to find your center of gravity first. After the break, the ghoul dug his heels in and gripped the bark again. Every eye was on him, waiting for a miracle. The creature let out a guttural roar, summoning every ounce of his will to gain. Pushing with everything his new muscles could give to bring the trunks down, he exploded with all his might. The canopy started to shake, and the wood began to groan under the pressure. It was a massive improvement, but Ansal signaled for him to step back. Ansal knew that compound movements were king, and that's exactly what they were going to master today. It was time to see if the rest of the team was ready to level up. Thinking about the gap, our hero began to study the chicken's movements with surgical precision. The birds were clashing and shoving each other with weirdly effective leverage. Their wings were locking together in a very specific mechanical pattern. Suddenly, the light bulb went off. Ansal saw the secret to their freakish power. He'd been so focused on raw strength he'd missed the biomechanical cheat code. He gathered his team and apologized for the oversight. A ghoul asked if his elbow positioning was wrong, but Ansal shook his head. It was deeper than that. Their muscles had become too comfortable with the current routine. To shatter this plateau and reach God-tier status, they had to shock the system. He barked an order for them to line up. 5 rows, chest out, shoulders back. The squad snapped to attention, sensing a massive power-up was coming. Ansal rigged up a makeshift cable machine out of vines and logs to reinvent their chest day. The ghouls stared at the contraption like it was a holy relic from the god of iron. He announced they were going to master the cable fly to target that inner chest definition and tear those chickens apart. The hype levels hit the ceiling. The ghouls were foaming at the mouth to start the new set. They began pounding their chests, letting out roars that echoed through the jungle. Ansal signaled for silence. It was time for the scientific gains lecture. He explained that this movement carves out the inner pec and improves fiber density, but it's only effective if your form is 100 perfect, which is a nightmare for a rookie. First, Ansal stepped into the frame, leaning forward with his knees bent to create an unbreakable foundation. The second secret lies in the arms. You've got to keep a slight bend in the elbows to make sure the tension doesn't leak into your shoulders. Now, square up in the center of the rig and bring your hands together while locking that elbow angle. Depending on the path of the cables, you'll torch a specific section of your chest fibers. After the masterclass, Ansal opened the floor for any questions from his loyal ghoul disciples. He didn't stop there. He rigged up even more makeshift cable stations using the trees so everyone could get their pump on. The entire squad was absolutely wired, itching to test out this new way to tear their chest muscles. Our hero can't help but smirk watching these once scrawny creatures turn into full-blown gym rats. One of the ghouls began channeling every ounce of his newfound explosive power. Even the brainless chickens started to pick up on a dark, heavy aura radiating from the forest. The squad had followed Ansal's program to the letter, and now their pectoral development had reached a level that defied all biological logic. The chickens' eyes went wide, locking onto the sheer mass standing before them. Those slabs of muscle weren't just for show. They were a direct threat to the pecking order. A chicken's brain might be the size of a pea, but even they knew they were in deep trouble. The ghouls' chests were bulging so hard it was borderline offensive. This triggered a primal survival instinct in the birds. They all began to glow with a blinding, intense light. That caught Ansal's eye. This wasn't part of the standard workout routine. It was clear as day. A forced evolution was happening right before his eyes. The chickens sprouted jagged, reinforced feathers, and Ansal. realized instantly that these birds had just jumped up several weight classes. But the ghouls didn't flinch. They were confident their gains would carry them through any boss fight. The chickens were equally cocky, feeling the surge of raw, mutated power coursing through their wings. A legendary clash was about to pop off. The mindless fury of the mutant hens versus the raw iron will of the hungry ghouls. The chicken's sudden power spike was actually off the charts. The newly evolved birds began to physically dominate their opponents with terrifying speed. One of the ghouls learned the hard way that looks don't always win a fight. Ansal stayed on the sidelines, analyzing every frame of the brutal brawl. The system pinged a warning. The chickens had evolved because of overstimulation from seeing such elite physiques. Back at the base, Gordon was staring lazily at the clouds. It's honestly impressive how he's the only one left who refuses to touch a dumbbell. With the drill sergeant away, he was finally soaking in the sweet taste of freedom. But being a man of substantial build, he quickly realized he was starving. He appreciates Ansal's help, but he's tired of the plain chicken and broccoli lifestyle. The man has standards. That's why he's going off script today to whip up some crispy grilled chicken skin with his own secret spice blend. Gordon started prepping the skin with surgical precision so it would reach maximum crispiness. Before the sizzle, he had to massage in his special medley of local herbs and spices. He even whipped up a custom batter to give the skin that golden, crunchy coating. He coated every single strip, making sure not a single inch of that fatty goodness was missed. Once the oil was screaming hot, he dropped the goods in, starting the ultimate cheat meal fry-up. Gordon successfully created the forbidden snack he'd been dreaming about all week. Meanwhile, the forest floor was turning into a bloodbath. Ansal's trainees were getting absolutely dismantled by the feathered monstrosities. Despite all that specific isolation training, they couldn't find a way to pin the birds down. Their spirits were crashing hard, but one of the ghouls roared at the top of his lungs that they hadn't come this far just to quit. There had to be a logical reason why their gains weren't translating into a total victory. Walking up to the battered trainee, Ansal saw the look of total confusion in his eyes. The problem was simple. It was a matter of training age. The ghouls were rookies, while these chickens were born in the grind. Facing that brutal truth, the ghoul's heart sank into his stomach. Forging a chest that rivals a monster bird isn't a weekend project. It takes years of sacrifice. But Ansal smirked. Impossible wasn't a word in his dictionary. The ghoul's eyes lit up again, realizing the god of iron still had a card to play. Our protagonist told them to look back at where they started and remember the fire that got them here. The trainee realized they only survived this hellish regimen because they leaned on each other. Every single one of them had bled and sweated right alongside their master. The sets were grueling, but they were all chasing that same dream of becoming elite. Ansal saw their mental fortitude was peaking, but they couldn't afford to let their intensity drop for even a second. Just because they put on some lean mass doesn't mean they've fully purged their weakling souls. Ansal reminded them that back in his world, a 500 kilograms pull was just the entry fee to the club. You've got to master the foundation of all power, the legs, no matter how much it burns. The ghouls caught the vibe, igniting a second wind and repping out like possessed demons. That shot of gym bro motivation unlocked a hidden reservoir of strength deep within the trainee's soul. As he stood up, he flexed his quads with such explosive force it would have made even a pro athlete jealous. Ansal realized the kid finally got it, the epiphany of total body recruitment. They lost because they tried to bro-split the fight with just their chests. Now it was time for a full-body assault. The lead ghoul charged back into the fray with a roar, ready to show that chicken who the real alpha of the forest was. Ansal knew they'd endured enough no pain, no gain moments to earn this victory. It was finally time to cash in on all those months of soul-crushing hard work. The ghoul poured every ounce of his spirit into his fist, and the chicken screeched back, meeting him head-on with mutated fury. But once again, the ghouls got sent flying like they'd just been hit by a freight train. The poor trainee hit the dirt, wondering what he'd done wrong this time. His comrades were being tossed around like rag dolls in a hurricane. It was at that moment that Ansal realized he might have overtrained them. He'd made them carry so much weight on the way there, that their muscles were probably too fatigued to actually fight. With the battlefield cleared, the chickens started strutting around like they owned the place. One of the birds noticed a lone figure still standing tall amidst the carnage. It was our protagonist, casually watching the whole disaster with his arms crossed. This time, the chicken wasn't looking for a fight. It was looking for a 5-course meal. The alpha bird charged Ansal with its entire flock behind it, but the man didn't even blink. Because he already knew exactly how this boss fight was going to end. He didn't need a sword or magic. He just needed the power of a single, well-trained arm. The chickens were sprinting full tilt toward their own funeral. Just before the impact that would change everything, the leader of the flock had its life flash before its eyes. Remembering its days as a scrawny, helpless little chick, it recalled wanting to grow up fast and knock down trees, just like the big roosters, worshiping the massive wingspans and powerful chests of the elders, and the way they used their movements to harden their bodies, sculpting themselves into feathered tanks. But all that training meant nothing against the force of nature known as Ansal. Minutes later, the dust settled on a very different scene. A massive, high-protein chicken stew was bubbling over the fire. Ansal told the group to relax. The failure they experienced today was the best lesson they could ever learn. He ordered them to crush that protein tonight, because tomorrow, the grind starts all over again. It was time to let their bodies soak up the gains from a day of absolute hell. The ghouls let out a thunderous cheer, their voices shaking the trees as they shouted gains. In unison, Ansal reminded them they were still miles away from reaching his level of greatness. He told them to study his teachings carefully and to be more tactical in their hunts from now on. The ghouls looked at him with worried eyes, asking if their master was planning on leaving them to hunt alone. Ansal told them he'd catch up in a bit, but had to wrap up his sets first, because in his world, missing a pump is a much bigger sin than missing a hunt. Right now, our boy is literally ripping massive boulders out of the earth, chasing a physique so shredded it shouldn't even exist. His only gripe? This heavy stone is starting to feel like a feather. It's just not giving him that soul-crushing burn anymore. He wished Gordon was around. That fat chief's weight-multiplying skill is exactly the progressive overload he needs right now. Deep in the woods, the ghoul squad is vibrating with confidence, eager to test drive their newly forged muscles. They know they can't let those chickens level up again, or the whole tribe is cooked. The goal is simple. Find the most surgical way to pluck those birds and end their reign of terror for good. The boss man can already solo 27 of those feathered freaks without breaking a sweat. Determined to make their sensei proud, the squad set a goal to bag at least 50 prize chickens today. They split into 3 tactical units. If the situation turns south, the signal to retreat is a high-frequency pec flex. Group 1 is already sliding into their hunting stances, eyes locked on the prize. They're sprinting through the brush, hyped on adrenaline and dreaming of a mountain of high-protein poultry. Meanwhile, the human trio stumbles upon a massive ribcage that looks like it belonged to a prehistoric jumbo chicken. Analyzing the clean snap in the bone, Indar figures it wasn't a sword. It was a single, high-tier destructive spell. Blinky immediately clocks the danger. Whoever did this is playing on the level of a great mage. This mission just got spicy, but his 2 overprotective bodyguards told him to relax and not worry his pretty little head about it. But just as they finished acting tough, the ground beneath their boots began to rumble like an earthquake. Tom brace. Something massive and very angry is headed their way. To their absolute shock, a tidal wave of terrified chickens comes screaming out of the foliage. Indar didn't even flinch. A few overgrown roosters weren't enough to rattle his cage. But right on the birds' tails is a mob of jacked, vascular ghouls, hunting them down like elite predators. One of the ghouls stops dead, locking eyes with the human intruders. The eye candy knight immediately tensed up. He'd never seen ghouls this buffed before and moved to shield Blinky. The 2 prodigies formed a wall of steel, protecting the physical safety of the group's precious active member. The lead ghoul signaled his bros to hold. He's heard stories about how lethal humans can be and didn't want to poke a hornet's nest. He knew that one wrong move in the standoff could cost his entire squad their lives. To play it safe, they started communicating using the secret language of the gym, rhythmic pectoral bouncing. Blinky watched the bouncing muscles with pure fascination, wondering if this was some rare, ancient secret art. The ghouls were trying to coordinate a regroup, but this unexpected encounter was throwing a wrench in the plan. Unfortunately, having massive, high-definition muscle volume can be a double-edged sword. That high-frequency pec flexing didn't just alert the ghouls. It also overstimulated the nearby chickens. The birds began to undergo a rapid, hideous evolution, transforming into mid-tier monsters with those iconic villain eyebrows. Blinky's eyes widened as he realized these roosters now had more raw power than a high-level wyvern. Armed with a fresh buff, the birds decided to flip the script and counterattack the ghouls. The poor guys realized that life isn't always a victory lap. Sometimes it's like drinking gasoline with a side of regret. But even in the face of death, there were some truly legendary souls among the tribe. The leaders of Team 2 and Team 3 burst onto the scene just in time for an epic crossover. Dropping in like shonen protagonists, the whole Iron Squad was finally back together. It's time for the ultimate poultry execution. The ghouls are ready to show these feathered punks who truly owns the forest. They're about to unleash the forbidden secret technique they learned from Ansal himself. Just as he prepared to strike, the lead ghoul's life flashed back to a core memory. He was pinned under a heavy barbell, gasping for air and failing his set, when Ansal's voice boomed. "Form overweight, kid. Learn the basics before you try to be a hero." He taught them that it's okay to ask for a spot if you can't handle the load on your own. He made it clear that true strength is knowing how to push your limits safely. And thus, the ultimate ghoul secret technique was born. The assisted bench press strike. Lining up like a high-speed games train, they pinned the chickens with overwhelming force. Every fiber, every tendon, every muscle was screaming as they squeezed the life out of the enemy. The chicken caught in that muscular vise was deeply reconsidering its entire existence, feeling the raw, unadulterated power of the grind. The birds were met with a soul-crushing defeat that was as embarrassing as it was painful. They simply couldn't compete with the ghoul's superior aesthetic and raw power. Ansal's students finally felt the rush of victory. However, this is the fog of war, and one lone ghoul suddenly found himself cut off from the pack. He was cornered by a swarm of hell chickens with zero room to maneuver. Accepting his fate, he whispered a final thanks to his bros, ready to head to the great gym in the sky. But another trainee saw him. His blood boiled with rage. He wasn't about to let a gym bro fall on his watch. They say it only takes a fraction of a second to like someone, and these humans have been watching these jack ghouls for nearly 10 minutes. For them, that was more than enough time to forge a bond. They weren't going to let some chickens ruin the vibe. They unsheathed their blades, ready to turn the birds into nuggets. However, the humans also realized that life isn't always a refreshing, ice-cold soda. Sometimes it's a warm, flat, generic brand that leaves a weird aftertaste in your mouth. Suddenly, Indar's survival instinct screamed. Something massive was coming. Emerging from the darkness was the godfather of chickens, the alpha of alphas. It had undergone a hatred evolution, radiating an aura of pure despair that choked the air. Even if Blinky opened his eyes, he wouldn't be able to comprehend the monstrosity standing before him. This wasn't just a bird. It was a feathered calamity. The beast looked down at the knights as if they were nothing more than tiny, insignificant earthworms. The legend shifts back to a time of myth, the story of the very first dragon. A creature of legend known for its insatiable greed and world-ending power. Terrified that a successor might one day steal his throne, he shattered his own essence and scattered it across the land. And that, believe it or not, is exactly how the hell chickens were born. This dragon-blooded chicken was ready to end it all. Indar charged forward, betting on the fact that this thing only had a fraction of a dragon's power, determined to claim its head. He wanted to prove his worth to his master once and for all. The eye candy knight didn't hesitate, jumping in to provide the ultimate backup. Indar aimed a world-shaking blow with his blunt sword. Meanwhile, our protagonist is still back at the village, grinding like his life depends on it. He's still not satisfied with his progress. He looks in the mirror and sees a small frame. But then, he realized that true power isn't just about the size of the container. Despite being a compact unit, he's the one these ghouls would follow into hell. It's been 3 long months of blood, sweat, and iron since they met. At the start, they were just a bunch of skin and bone weaklings waiting for the end. Ansal had to build them from the ground up, teaching them the sacred path of the iron 1 rep at a time. There were so many moments where they almost threw in the towel and quit. But they embraced the agony, knowing that no pain, no gain wasn't just a slogan, it was a law. Even though he was the teacher, watching their growth gave Ansal a rush he couldn't explain. In this quiet moment of reflection, his mind drifted to his own master. It's a strange coincidence. His master disappeared when he was exactly the age Ansal is now. His deep thoughts were shattered by a frantic, breathless ghoul screaming for help. Ansal snapped out of it, giving the panicked creature his full attention. The ghoul gasped out the horror. The chickens evolved into monsters, and the hunting party is about to be wiped out. If he doesn't move now, his students are going to be nothing but bird food. Ansal's eyes went cold as he entered beast mode, simply asking the ghoul to point him toward the chaos. The ghoul pointed a trembling finger deep into the dark forest. The system instantly flared with a red alert. Warning, catastrophic muscle contraction detected. Ansal began to channel a level of physical force that defied the laws of physics, causing his muscles to swell into an absolutely terrifying mountain-like volume. Our boy is now pure, unadulterated fury. He's about to show these chickens exactly what happens when you mess with his family. With his power levels peaked, it was time to achieve liftoff. The ground beneath our hero's feet implodes, shattered by his god-tier starting stance. Shockwaves of raw energy ripple outward, making the very orbit of the planet tremble. Finally, the protagonist kicks off with explosive leg drive, vanishing into the clouds like a supersonic shooting star, leaving a lone ghoul in his wake. Meanwhile, the brawl against that alpha hell chicken is reaching a bloody fever pitch. The human's blades are useless. They can't even scratch its armor-plated hide. Desperate for a plan, the young warrior tells his bro to bait the beast while he gears up for a killing blow. Indar doesn't hesitate. He's all in. He unleashes his secret utility skill, Dust Mirror, right in the hell chicken's face. Hoping to buy a few precious seconds, he screams for Blinky to get out of the blast zone. But Blinky stands his ground. He refuses to be the guy who runs while his bros bleed. The distraction was a total bust. The hell chicken blew the dust away with one wing and smacked the kid into next week. The poor boy's body skipped across the dirt like a stone, yet he still managed to throw up a weak thumbs up. What a legend. Blinky couldn't wrap his head around why his friends were always shielding him instead of focusing on the kill. Indar sighed, telling Leaper that Blinky's burden mentality is actually their biggest motivation. Completely boxed in by a swarm of mutated roosters, they finally hit the grim realization. They're totally outclassed. Blinky saw the exits closing. Running was off the table. Defeat was a heartbeat away, but suddenly, the ghouls in the area began chanting a forbidden secret technique. They stacked up into a massive muscle tower, but even those crumbling under the bird's freakish strength. The survivors are redlining every muscle fiber, straining to keep the beast pinned, because they know their savior is only seconds away from a superhero landing. They're betting their entire lives on that one belief. They won't let go of that faith for anything in this world or the next. The hell chicken's talons descend, dripping with lethal intent. With a violent screech, the creature finally shatters the ghoul's formation. Trainees were scattered across the dirt like broken toys, utterly defeated. The atmosphere is thick with despair. The end is near. They're all at the mercy of those cursed, feathered demons, who are opening their beaks to start a total massacre. At that exact microsecond, a blinding beam of light pierced the canopy, slamming into that alpha bird skull with the force of a freight train. Finally, the ghouls realized their prayers had been answered. Their faith in the protagonist had never wavered for a second. But as the debris and dust settled, they saw the hero who arrived was actually Gordon. Nobody expected a save from the tribe's most physically challenged member. While they tried to process Gordon's grand entrance, another body slammed into the earth nearby, sending up a mushroom cloud of dirt and grit. It's our protagonist. The god of gains himself has entered the chat. Turns out he got some trash directions from the scouts, leading Ansal to land in the completely wrong zip code. Gordon is now surrounded by the surviving chickens, looking like a snack. At least the biggest threat in the flock had already been pancaked. Even facing certain death, Gordon is acting like he's the main character. He scoffed, asking if that puny attack was all the chickens had in the tank. Blinky realized Gordon was a ghoul, while his jacked friend noted the raw power of that landing. A ghoul survivor told them to keep their eyes peeled, because Gordon isn't just some fat guy. He's the chief. But the chickens didn't get the memo. They're ready to dish out some serious pain. But Gordon isn't as dumb as he looks. He's got a plan. His tactical aura hyped up the ghouls. They never doubted the chief's high IQ, and he's about to use every bit of it. Now that he's playing the bait, the protagonist is free to sweep the field. Dropping to his knees, Gordon immediately started crying and begging Ansal to save him. The ghoul's hope dipped again, mostly because the protagonist was still nowhere to be seen. Gordon started sweating bullets too. His savior was taking way too long to show up. 6 hours ago, life at the hideout was peak chill. No stress, no workouts, just pure relaxation. Gordon woke up from a marathon nap and wondered why his hunting team wasn't back yet. His stomach let out a roar that could rival a dragon. He was starving. Figuring the chickens were probably already dealt with, Gordon waddled into the forest to find his dinner. 5 minutes before the big landing, the ghouls were still being used as punching bags. Gordon arrived just in time to see his boys getting absolutely wrecked. Seeing red, he roared, wanting to know who dared to touch his subordinates, and more importantly, Ansal's students. There's only one guy allowed to boss these ghouls around, and that's Gordon, who started deadlifting a mountain-sized boulder. Unlike the others, he never officially joined the training sessions to get ripped. But strangely, his rank as the strongest never changed. And here's the plot twist. The reason is simple. Even after 3 months of training, the ghouls still couldn't match Gordon's raw output. It sounds fake, because Gordon looks like he'd lose a fight to a wet paper bag. But here is the real secret behind his hidden power. He's been using his skill non-stop to double the protagonist's weights, which meant Gordon was basically doing high-intensity isometric training the whole time. He channeled that accidental power into the massive stone, hoisting it with pure, unadulterated rage. He launched the rock like a tactical nuke. Honestly, it's a perfect metaphor for the extinction of the dinosaurs. Chickens were about to meet their maker. He cranked the weight up tenfold in midair and it impacted the ground like a literal meteor strike. Back to the present. Gordon realized his one-shot wonder didn't finish the job, and they were all cooked. But the ghouls are masters of self-delusion. Seeing Gordon crush one bird convinced them he was a hidden god, since taking down a hell chicken in one hit is basically a flex only a king could perform. Buying into his own hype, the fat chief started believing he was a natural-born prodigy, superior to everyone else. With his ego through the roof, he truly thought he was about to solo the entire flock. Instead, he got a one-way ticket to a brutal beatdown, getting launched in the stratosphere like a team rocket exit. The remaining ghouls are now officially hopeless. Blinky looked at his brothers in arms. His friends told him they were never playing around. They were ready to die for him. Even so, Blinky thought they were just being dramatic and started planning his afterlife routine. Accepting the inevitable, he felt a strange peace knowing he was dying beside his best friends. The ghouls also decided to flex every single muscle they had left. They prepared to give the chickens the most aesthetic final stand in history. Grateful to Ansal for showing them the path of the pump, they charged, like a legion of iron-willed warriors against the hell chickens. The human trio mirrored them, drawing their steel for one last dance. The only problem is that these chickens are as sadistic as they are brain-dead. In a final explosion of courage, the two sides are finally about to collide in a bloodbath. Deep in the brush, the protagonist finally found the cratered Gordon. With his last bit of breath, Gordon wheezed out a plea for his people. They're being slaughtered. Ansal is the only one who can flip the script. Drowning in his own delusions, Gordon still tried to act like his talent was just taking a nap. That tragic sight triggered a violent, uncontrollable explosion of emotion deep within our hero. Even his passive maintain calm skill was completely overridden by this raw, primal impulse. Meanwhile, the ghoul tribe was prepared to go out in a blaze of glory for their final stand. They tried to strike, but the chickens were moving with blinding, unnatural speed. One of the ghouls began to panic, but when he glanced back at the enemy, he realized the chickens were actually the ones trembling and huddling together in terror. A fierce, demonic aura had just erupted from the dark heart of the forest. It was our protagonist. His pectoral muscles were vibrating like the trumpets of the apocalypse. That flex-off drew every single chicken's eyes, making our boy's job a whole lot easier. With their pea-sized brains, the birds could only stare at their next victim in a daze. Radiating an abyssal coldness, Ansal whispered that he had never felt more at peace in his life. At least the ghouls were smart enough not to stick around for the coming carnage. They could feel a resonance in their own muscles, a frequency only their master could produce. Blinky wanted to know who they were talking about, while the pretty boy behind him prepared for the fight of his life. The ghoul said, That is our master. The legendary man who showed them the sacred path to becoming absolutely jacked and god-tier. But words are cheap. It's better for a human to witness this sheer glory with their own eyes. However, another ghoul called his buddy an idiot, telling him his storytelling skills were absolute trash. So, he decided to start the epic tale from the very first rep. Ansal is the new boss of the hideout and the Lord of Ghouls, but Blinky still hadn't processed a single word. The chickens were still acting cocky, thinking they could actually take our boy down. One alpha bird lunged, putting every ounce of its mutated strength into a strike. But our protagonist casually stopped the bone-crushing blow with one hand. In the same breath, he delivered a soul-shattering gut punch that defied the laws of physics. Despite not having flight, that chicken just soared through the canopy like a supersonic hawk. The rest of the flock didn't appreciate seeing their comrade get vibe-checked into the stratosphere. They immediately began performing high-level, coordinated evasive maneuvers. It looked like they were winding up for a lethal, feathered ultimate move. The creatures began interlocking their talons in midair, performing a synchronized dance so embarrassing it could kill, all to crush our boy. The lead rooster realized that even their combined cringe wasn't enough to shake him. Using only a tiny fraction of his power, the protagonist halted their massive momentum dead in its tracks. The chickens realized that if they wore briefs, they'd be incredibly heavy right now, but not all of them were quitters. A few brave souls still wanted to dish out some poultry-flavored violets. They began a frantic ground and pound on our protagonist, hoping to keep him down forever. But this isn't that kind of manhwa. Ansal snatched the legs of one attacker and used the bird as a biological catapult to launch himself at a chicken that couldn't even track his speed. Our boy pulverized the poor creature with a devastating, high-impact knee strike, making it feel the exact level of end-of-the-world agony a man feels when he gets a minor cold. With another foe down, the remaining birds finally started to lose their minds in pure terror. The protagonist recalled a lesson from his mentor. You can build muscle through high-frequency vibrations. That's exactly why he lured the entire flock to this one specific kill zone. He was amping his strength through internal muscle vibrations, and the chickens simply couldn't keep up, because they weren't even in the same league as the true king of this jungle. Using techniques banned in every legitimate gym on Earth, the protagonist began doing CrossFit. The chickens saw his kipping as a weakness and tried to swarm him one last time. But the only reward they got for that petty gesture was an even more violent beatdown, because the protagonist's strength is just straight up broken. This time, he decided to show them the true pump capacity of his elite muscle fibers, launching the very earth and everything on it into the high stratosphere. The birds could do absolutely nothing to stop the inevitable game over. The battle was getting way too complex for these birds, who aren't exactly known for their IQ. Now the protagonist was knocking out a high-volume set of light-speed squats. With his quads properly primed, he began batting the chickens away with a piece of wood. By piece of wood, I mean he was swinging an entire massive tree trunk like a baseball bat. He was pulling off mid-air pirouettes like a world-class Olympic gymnast. Now it's time to let the triceps join the party. The protagonist hurled the massive trunk directly at one of the birds, manually ejecting its soul from its physical body on impact. Finally, the ghouls and the human trio reached the center of the carnage. Still processing the madness, Blinky asked if that muscle god was really the ghouls' mayor. It was simply impossible for a single human to wield such overwhelming, world-shaking power. The hell chickens were now paralyzed with fear as the protagonist moved at near-light speeds. To pull off these moves, he had burned through a massive amount of his leg stamina. He couldn't afford to waste another drop of energy on these low-level mobs. He started reflecting on the brutal training he'd endured with Gordon. It was hell for the fat man, who nearly died from the grind. But Ansal had to honor the memory of the man who helped him gain. Ansal decided to end the entire war with his very next strike, channeling every ounce of his suppressed violence. He charged the flock. It was time to show them the ultimate power of the absolute beastly bench press. As he went for his 1-rep max, the system issued a critical warning. His lower body was overloading under his torso's raw weight. Before our hero lay an endless sea of thousands of hell chickens. But to his shock, several pairs of hands reached out to help him with the lift. It was the ghouls stepping up to spot their mayor for the final set of his life. It's time for one last rep, or they're going straight to total muscular failure. With his brotivation reaching its peak, the protagonist realized he could break any limit with his squad by his side. He unleashed immeasurable destruction, wiping every last chicken off the face of the map. Finally, Ansel honored Gordon's sacrifice and completed his daily workout. Lying in the dirt, completely spent, the protagonist realized he was actually going to miss that fat chief. The ghouls looked back on life before the protagonist. Gordon was a tyrant, but he turned into a real one after meeting Ansel. Now the protagonist needed a new training partner to help with the heavy sets. He began scanning his subordinates for a lucky volunteer. The news was a disaster. No one would make eye contact. They all looked away until, to everyone's absolute shock, Gordon stood up, dusting himself off and thanking the protagonist for the solid workout. Our boy just stood there in a state of stunned, confused silence, as did every other ghoul standing in the clearing. Gordon had no idea why everyone was acting like they'd seen a ghost. He'd just taken a quick nap because the fight was a bit tiring. The whole tribe rushed Gordon for a massive group hug, but the poor guy had no clue what he did to deserve the love. As the pile-on intensified, Gordon realized he might actually die from the hugs instead of the chickens. Relieved and grinning, the protagonist welcomed Gordon back from the afterlife. Meanwhile, in a village on the outskirts of the forest, the Count received the news. The person who wiped out the hell chickens had been found. That's the intel his elite trio, the ones sent to the woods, were reporting back. The Count knew the ghouls weren't the real threat. The true danger was that mysterious human living among them. You never know when a new predator will show its claws, so the Count started carefully planning his next move. As he sat in thought, the general asked where Blinky was, her eyes welling up with tears. The two protectors were about to deliver the most awkward news of their entire lives. While the crew was cooling down, someone started getting way too hands-on with China's physique. As a true connoisseur of muscle, Ansel began deep scanning those wild proportions, purely for scientific research, obviously. The bear and the twink were not vibing with that excessive touching and immediately went into full aggro mode. But Ansel was too busy being awestruck by the boy's impeccable skeletal structure and posture. The bear was fuming, hating the way his bro was being handled like some piece of rare loot. Totally unfazed by the sharp steel at his throat, Ansel looked China in the eye and asked, "Do you want to get truly strong?" Before the blades could even graze him, Ansel snatched them out of the air using nothing but his fingers. He asked again, demanding a straight answer from China's heart. Because if he's hungry for real power, he needs to ditch the steel and embrace the holy path of iron and gains. This sudden recruitment pitch left China's brain completely short-circuited. Flashback to the rescue. The two protectors were getting choked up. They've been forced to leave China in that den of monsters. They're now pleading with the general to save China from those jacked demons, convinced the workouts are some kind of forbidden black magic. The Count knows the stakes are high, but he's playing it safe. They can't just dive into a war without a plan. He figured the general wouldn't be reckless enough to charge in, but he severely underestimated the muscle mom's rage. Flexing a fraction of her world-ending aura, the general vowed they'd pay in blood and ordered the squad to gear up for a massacre. The Count tried to calm her down, but the general was already a woman possessed by a violent battle spirit. In that moment, the old man knew there was no stopping this train. She was out for blood. The general doesn't take kindly to anyone touching her property. It's time to rain hellfire on those forest-dwelling gym rats. She stormed out of the war room, her heavy cape snapping in the wind behind her. It's officially go time for the rescue mission deep into the heart of the woods. Back at the HQ, Ansel is giving the rookie a tour and introducing the first lesson of the day, the legendary squat. China stood there looking lost. The poor guy didn't even know what a squat was. But Ansel smirked, promising to guide him through the gateway of leg day heaven. He explained that this is the ultimate foundation for weight stability and explosive, bone-shattering leg drive. Ansel noticed China was already gassed. He'd basically just collapsed into a heap on the floor. It's clear China is hitting a massive mental wall before he's even started. Ansel told him that just crouching down is a joke. That's not a squat. He needs to activate the quads and master hip flexion. Step 1, stance. Feet out, shoulder width apart. Get that solid base. Knees and toes pointing the same way. Then drop those hips like you're sitting onto a royal throne. Keep the tension locked strictly in the glutes and thighs. That, my friend, is a real squat. Ansal was actually shocked. China's form was weirdly perfect for a beginner, like he was a natural. China muttered he'd only ever done fencing. Brushing off that useless sword talk, Ansal barked at him to knock out another set. He warned him to keep that core tight. If he keeps those arms steady, the personal trainer from hell is adding some extra weight. As the iron bar touched China's traps, the boy felt like the weight of the entire world was trying to bury him. And the kicker? Ansal hadn't even let go of the bar yet. When he finally released the weight, China felt the true, crushing reality of the iron. With a cold, firm voice, Ansal told his pupil not to let that form break. He needs to keep that weight moving or get crushed. Fueled by pure spite and a desperate need to prove himself, China gritted his teeth and drove the bar back up. That was enough for one day. Ansal took the weight as the ghoul squad erupted in applause. The rookie might be scrawny, but he's got the heart of a lion. Ansal was low-key impressed by the kid's potential and his ability to hold his posture under pressure. Now, he's 100% sure as Hawk. I didn't lie to him about this kid. This is the raw essence of powerlifting. Ansal recalled that China only chose this path because he's desperate to stop being the weak one. China's hunger for strength is just as intense as his bromantic friends who live for the blade. Ansal remarked that China might never be strong in the way his sword-swinging friends are. That comment hit China like a ton of bricks, leaving him feeling pretty discouraged. He figured an ordinary guy like him could never catch up to a prodigy, no matter how much he bled in the gym. He thanked Ansal for the lesson, ready to accept his fate. But Ansal wasn't having any of that loser talk. He told China he'd be a different kind of monster, strong enough to be the shield that keeps his friends alive. Because China has a hidden talent that's 1 in a million. This praise made the kid's eyes snap open for the second time in his life. Judging by the way he was biting his lip, that compliment hit him right in the feels. Visible moved, he admitted it was the first time anyone had ever truly believed in him. Ansal just told him to stop the waterworks. Suddenly, the system pinged. Hawk, I has evolved to level 3. Next, we see Ansal cradling some hell chicks in his arms like a muscular mother hen. He's doing this for the ecosystem. They can't just hunt them all to extinction or the protein supply will vanish. They need to set up a sustainable farm so the hell poultry stays on the menu. Gordon noted that these birds grow like weeds, so raising them will be a breeze. Besides, hardly any predators can touch these mutant birds. Even the chicks are born with a heart full of pure hatred. The catch is that once they hit adulthood, they're unstoppable. Ansal asked if Gordon was really too weak to handle a few birds. Gordon stayed silent, his face a perfect picture of "Are you kidding me?" skepticism. Ansal leaned in. Can you really not handle it? Or are you just being lazy? Sweating under the pressure, Gordon stuttered that maybe if the stars aligned, there was a tiny chance for victory. Ansal loved that answer. He told Gordon never to underestimate his tribe, especially with the gains they're currently cultivating. Back on the grind, the ghouls are synced up, pumping out high-volume squat sets. They're all moving to the rhythm of Ansal's count. In the crowd, one ghoul is rubbing a very suspicious white powder on his hands. Is it chalk or something for a wild party? The user's face says it all. China is deep in a set while Gordon uses his mass multiplier skill to amp up the gravity. He asked China if he was actually ready for the soul-crushing agony that was about to hit. With fire in his eyes, China declared he was born for this pain. And with that, Gordon flipped the switch on his ability. The weight doubled in a split second. China's eyes popped open again as his nervous system screamed. Gordon had to lock in to keep the skill's pressure from crushing the kid flat. The strain was so intense that a vein on China's forehead looked like it was about to explode. Meanwhile, Ansal is casually crushing his own workout, barking motivation at the ghouls to keep pushing. Every single one of them is grinding through brutal, bone-tiring reps for the glory of the pump. Suddenly, a high-level presence with a sword flickered into the clearing. Without saying a word, this mystery figure launched a blink-and-you-miss-it attack on the gym. A massive, shock-inducing explosion rocked the entire training ground. The ghouls caught in the blast were sent flying mid-set. China was frozen in terror, and Gordon had zero clue what kind of raid was happening. Until the smoke cleared, and he saw exactly who had crashed the party. It's the general. She's arrived to find out which monster dared to kidnap her star pupil. Gordon stammered that it was all a big misunderstanding. He's not the boss anymore, and he's never seen this scary lady in his life. Ready to delete Gordon from the census, The general told him he should have just answered yes or no. She unleashed a devastating, air-slicing strike that should have ended the fight right there. But she quickly realized that this kidnapper wasn't a normal target. Ansal caught the blade with his bare forearm, casually stating that the only thing they kidnap here is their own limits during exercise. The general actually looked impressed. This man's physique was literally hard enough to stop a master-crafted sword. Ansal noticed the blade actually managed to leave a tiny scratch. Okay, this lady is legit dangerous. The general called out to her squad to confirm if this muscle-bound freak was the kidnapper. The protectors confirmed it from the bushes, shouting to China with tears in their eyes that his rescue had arrived. The bear and the twink were making a scene, crying about how much they'd missed their helpless friend. The general apologized for the interruption, but noted that stealing someone else's student is a crime punishable by death. Ansal slowly turned his gaze toward China. He hadn't realized the kid was already signed up with another coach. If he'd known, he might have handled the recruitment differently. China started stuttering, trying to explain the whole crazy story from the beginning. But Ansal cut him off, telling him that bodybuilding is 1,000,000 times cooler than playing with sticks. He told China to be honest. He doesn't have to hide the fact that he's fallen in love with the pump. The kid just stands there, dead silent. Bowing to the general, he dropped a bombshell. He's fallen head over heels for the pump, and it beats swordplay any day. He felt bad that she marched her army all this way just to fetch him. But he made it clear. He's found a new master to guide his journey toward peak aesthetics. The general realized that logic and words were officially off the table. Without another word, she let her blade slide from its scabbard with a lethal hiss. If her student won't come home willingly, she'll just have to drag his jacked torso back by force. Tapping into her hidden arts, she unleashed a flurry of strikes aimed straight at our hero. But Ansal's recovery game is top tier. His muscles turned into literal armor as he struck a legendary pose. With a perfectly timed side chest flex, he actually bounced her blade right off his pectorals. The general's pride took a massive hit right then and there. She's one of the strongest, yet all she did was leave a paper cut on the kid's skin. She asked if China's dream was really to become a muscle monster, and the boy didn't even blink before saying yes. Fine then. She proposed a wager, a duel between masters, where the winner takes the disciple and all the glory. It was the ultimate showdown to see which way of life reigned supreme. Ansal scoffed, saying bodybuilding isn't some martial art. It's the sacred science of sculpting the perfect human form. The general countered, pointing out he soloed the hell chicken. Ansal just shrugged, saying he was just hunting for his daily protein fix. She laughed it off, claiming that all those showy muscles are useless baggage in a real life-or-death struggle. That useless comment cut deeper than any blade could. His lifter's pride was officially triggered. Seeing him seethe, she doubled down, asking what good a mountain of muscle is if it can't even win a scrap. To her, it's all just high-quality trash, all show and no go. But that insult ignited a strange, burning fire deep within Ansal's soul. Determined to protect the honor of the gym, he prepared to show her the true, terrifying potential of a high-volume grind. The entire ghoul squad crowded around, eager to see a clash of the titans. Looking at the size difference, it looked like a mismatch. The general is barely half his size, but China warned them not to sleep on her. That midget is one of the 10 strongest calamities on the entire continent. Ansal activated his hawk eyes, realizing he was staring down a literal sword saint. He could read her stats like a book: weight, body fat, the works, and it baffled him how someone so lightweight could actually hurt him. It defied every law of the iron he knew. Intrigued, the general wondered what kind of brainwashing Ansal was using on her precious students. Backed by centuries of swordsmanship, she blurred into motion, raining down a barrage of lethal slashes on our boy. He managed to parry the hits, but the sheer kinetic energy behind her small frame was absolutely insane. She wasn't just swinging steel. She was cutting through space using pure mana. And she was more than happy to teach Ansal a lesson in humility through a world of pain. Our boy gritted his teeth, absorbing the impact of those glowing energy slashes. She kept calling him an alien despite his human face, and she taunted him to guess why. But Ansal was in the zone. He didn't have time for mid-fight monologues. Dodging a vertical cleave, she revealed the truth. The mana radiating from Ansal's body was a deep, demonic red. She launched into a series of aerial flips, repositioning for a killing blow. In this world, red mana means you're close to demon kin. And looking at his freakish gains, no human technique should be able to mutate a body like that. Ansal exploded outward, using pure leg drive to dodge the strike. He pulled off a series of tactical backflips to reset the distance and catch his breath. Ansal snapped back that if you actually put in the work, your body changes. It's called biology, and these people clearly skipped it. The general wasn't buying it. She's convinced only monsters can evolve their flesh like that, since real humans are limited to the path of mana manipulation. To prove her point, she prepared to unleash a high-speed, soul-ripping sword combo. Beams of pure energy converged on him from every angle like heat-seeking missiles. This is how the weak humans of this world bridge the gap against raw, physical power. A massive explosion of mana erupted across the clearing. Even with his iron body, it looked like Ansal finally took some real damage. No matter how hard he flexed, it seemed like pure gains. Couldn't bridge the gap against a master martial artist's refined techniques. Face down in the dirt, Ansal asked if her past enemies ever leveled up, but the concept was alien to her. He wanted to know how much stronger those losers got the day after their defeat, the post-workout gains. The general just scoffed, saying that's a stupid question, considering no one has ever survived long enough to see the next sunrise after facing her. Finally, our protagonist stopped holding back and summoned every ounce of his latent power. Hitting a legendary front double biceps pose like he was on the Mr. Olympia stage, he simply flexed through her energy waves. He roared that the real winners are the ones who show up to the gym. The very next day, after a proper rest and recovery session, now he's pulling out the big guns, his 10 rep max secret technique, turning his physique into something straight out of a nightmare. After his muscles ballooned to an absolutely terrifying, vein-popping scale, it was time for the Master of Iron to school the general in raw power. China watched the Titan clash with wide eyes, and a familiar face tapped him on the shoulder. It was those two protectors again, looking like they had a massive weight on their chests. The pretty boys started a tearful apology, assuming China would never want to see them again after the general's stunt. He was terrified China would loathe them for being such incompetent idiots. But our boy, who's admittedly a bit of a meathead, couldn't imagine why he'd ever hate his best bros. They were convinced China only ditched them because he felt like a burden. So, China set the record straight. He stayed because he wanted to be a student of the grind. He promised to return to the city once his transformation was complete. Hearing that was like a shot of pure adrenaline to the two passives' hearts. They were dying to know what kind of secret martial art he was practicing in this middle-of-nowhere gym. Even China struggled to put the glory of the pump into words. So he looked to Gordon, but the ex-boss was just as stumped for words as he was. Searching for a way to explain, China asked if they remembered their day one with the general. The twink recalled that it was all about building a rock-solid lower body foundation. So China started prepping them for the most painful experience of their lives, a high-volume leg day featuring the squat. Ansal's voice echoed in his head. Form over everything to stay out of the hospital. Gordon looked at the plates they were stacking and started to sweat. Putting that much iron on a rookie's back is a recipe for disaster. But China just gave a confident nod, promising he'd be the ultimate spotter for his friends. While the students bonded over the burn, Ansal and the general were still locked in a high-octane stalemate. Incredibly, the tiny woman was actually matching our boy's freakish, raw strength. But it didn't take long for her to realize he was pulling his punches, which ticked her off more than the fight itself. Ansal just smirked, saying he was just priming the pump and building up his concentric power. Mid-clash, her ears picked up some very strange, guttural groans coming from her other knights. Fearing an ambush, she broke the engagement to see what was happening to her squad. She froze in horror at the sight of her elite knights, shirtless and sweaty, bonding over heavy weights. Disturbed, and with a mind suddenly flooded with impure images, she demanded to know what kind of forbidden ritual this was. Ansal just wiped his brow, calling it a standard set of high-rep squats, the bread and butter of gains. Suddenly, her eyes lit up with a weird spark, and the general declared she'd be adding these rituals to her own regime immediately. Deflating back to his normal size, Ansal looked at her, totally confused. He wanted to know what she saw in a bunch of guys grunting that made her do a total 180. With total conviction, she said she saw something she'd never seen on a battlefield. True, sweaty joy. Finally, the two warriors shook hands, forming a legendary alliance forged in the fires of physical fitness. Scanning her one last time, our protagonist finally noticed something he'd missed before. Her forearm muscles were insanely developed and dense. He was dying to know her secret routine. Ansal could barely stay professional. He was vibrating with excitement at the thought of a new forearm day hack. She just laughed, saying it's nothing special, just 1,000 sword swings every single day. Now that he had his answer, she had a few burning questions of her own. The general's scratching her head, wondering if it's really wise for Ansal to just hand out his high-level training secrets like candy. But our boy's got a bigger vision. The more people grinding, the better the collective results. Still, Riona's totally lost. She can't see the tactical win in being so generous with his intel. Ansal breaks it down. He wants gyms on every corner, fostering a world where fitness knowledge flows like water. It's his ultimate dream, spreading the gospel of gains across the entire continent. Charmed by his unexpected optimism, the general admits Ansal is way more interesting than she first thought. She offers him a blank check favor, a move our protagonist knows is worth its weight in gold. As night falls on their journey, the crew huddles around a flickering campfire for some grub. China sneaks over to our hero, looking like he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. He drops some truth. The kingdom he calls home is the capital of Hate City, where discrimination is the national sport. They'll judge you for your race, your looks, and especially how much mana you're packing in your tank. Literally, any tiny difference is an excuse for them to look down their noses at you. He's terrified the anabolized ghouls will get roasted once they hit civilization, but Ansal just takes the news on the chin, staring the problem right in the eyes. China tries to suggest a rain check on the visit to brainstorm a safer plan, but Ansal's already tuned him out. Our boy has wandered off, but not for a fight. He's eyeing the horse's feed bags. Standard camp rations aren't hitting his macros, so Ansal's gone rogue to hunt for the specific nutrients his body craves. His face goes into deep focus mode as he inspects the goods. He loves that signature crunch. No doubt about it. This is the gold standard ingredient for his legendary oatmeal. Our boy is looking at those raw grains with stars in his eyes. The fact that only the horses are fueled by these clean carbs is a total system failure in his book. The soldiers are watching him, thinking our protagonist has officially lost his mind by eating livestock filler. Another one sneers, saying there's no hope for monsters who cling to such bottom-tier trash habits. Sliding into the convo like a pro, Gordon quips that those words would break a monster's sensitive heart. Gordon had tried the human food himself, and, honestly, he found it absolutely pathetic. He presents a small bowl of his own cooking to the skeptics. And one look at the dish has them questioning if they've been eating garbage their whole lives. Both soldiers decide to take a leap of faith and taste Gordon's secret stash. One bite in, and their brains are short-circuiting from the absolute flavor bomb exploding on their tongues. The mustache guy is ascending. It's the perfect sweet and sour profile with a spicy kick at the end. His long-haired buddy is convinced a culinary miracle just went off in his mouth. Gordon offers a deal. The recipe is theirs at the finish line, provided they stop bullying his ghoul brothers. The soldiers sign up instantly. Ansal marches up to the general, calling her Riona. She's confused why he's bothering her before the sun's even up. But our boy's here to cash in that favor she promised, and Riona isn't one to back out of debt. Holding out a handful of horse grain, Ansal makes his demand. He wants a lifetime supply of this stuff. Riona's baffled. It's literally just fodder. She figures he's just trying to feed those hell chicks he's been raising. Ansal corrects her with a straight face. The ghouls and here are the ones who'll be feasting on it. The general is legitimately pained. She actually feels a wave of pity for these poor souls reduced to eating animal mush. One ghoul tries to read the room, figuring they should probably listen to the high-ranking lady and decline the horse food for something fancier. But our protagonist is not amused by this lack of faith from his own squad. Riona tells him it's okay to ask for the good stuff, armor, better tents, real food. No need to be shy. She offers to upgrade their tents to luxury wooden cabins, and even hook the ghouls up with some high-end plate mail. A ghoul offers some hell chicken jerky as a trade-off, but the protagonist shuts it down again. They're missing the big picture. Going 100 protein is a death sentence for the liver. You've got to respect the metabolism. The right carbs turn into glycogen, the holy grail of muscle building, and oats are the ultimate slow-burn energy source. Low-calorie, nutrient-dense, and literally called the king of grains back on his home turf. In his world, There is no reward more prestigious than a big bowl of oats. Riona is still not buying it. To her, he just sounds like he's speaking a dead language. The ghouls are sweating, wondering if their leader has finally gone off the deep end. But the mood flips. They're suddenly hyped to taste this miracle grain that promises infinite gains in glycogen. The onlookers are stunned, starting to wonder if the secret to the ghouls' freakish strength really is hidden in the horse feed. Not wanting to be left out of the power-up, the soldiers declare they're joining the Oat Fest too. The two passives watch in awe as their former vulnerable friend starts munching on the fodder with zero shame. The ghouls are absolutely inhaling the stuff, with the soldiers right on their heels, desperate for the gains. The only ones left hungry are the horses, because even the general's elite students are giving it a go. Immediately, the miracle turns into a mess as everyone spits it out. Turns out, raw oats taste like sad cardboard. The skinny guy yells at China to dump it, convinced the grain is cursed or rotten. But China, ever the loyal student, decides to trust the process and keeps chewing with zen-like patience. He admits the texture is a battle, but the nutty finish is actually kind of elite. Ansal smiles. China's got the iron stomach talent. He'll be a beast in no time. Behind him, Riona is just standing there, lost. She doesn't get the logic, but hey, if the Oat King is happy, she's happy. She promises to ramp up production to keep his supply lines full of grain. Ansal's over the moon, calling her the Goat General, though everyone else who tasted the fodder is still traumatized. Morning hits, and the caravan finally rolls up to the castle gates, greeted by the local guard. As the path clears, our protagonist steps up to the front. He officially crosses the threshold into the lion's den. China gives him one last warning. Keep your guard up. The humans here love to judge. Within seconds, every eye in the city is glued to them. The air is thick with the prejudice China warned about. It's a cold welcome. Slowly, the ghouls start to feel the heavy weight of the crowd's stares. The entire city stops to watch the monsters parade through their streets. Ansal taps one of his bros on the shoulder, telling him to keep his head high and his chest out. The ghoul takes a nervous peek at the whispering locals. Our protagonist drops some positive vibes. They aren't staring because they're scared. They're staring because the squad looks aesthetic as hell. The ghouls aren't totally convinced, keeping their guard up, but China is 100% certain that admiration is the last thing on these people's minds. That's when one of the ghouls takes a massive, lung-expanding breath. On cue, the whole squad drops into a synchronized posing routine to flex their hard-earned gains. The once hostile crowd is now frozen in a state of pure, soul-crushing second-hand embarrassment. Whatever fear, they had vanished, replaced by total confusion as they witnessed the intensity of the muscle-posing session. Actually, seeing them act so extra made some of the locals start to feel a weird kind of sympathy for the big guys. Inside the throne room, the Count asks if Ansal is really going to train the general. He wonders if that's the fee for all the livestock he's been provided. Our boy clarifies. He only asked for seeds, the fuel for his followers. Because of that, the Count chalks Ansal up to being nothing more than an uncultured brute. He reminds them that the only reason these monsters are inside his walls is because Riona begged for a special favor. If it weren't for her, he wouldn't let Ansal's crew pass the front gate, period. Riona bows, thanking the Lord for his mercy, but the Count cuts her off with a sharp bark. Clearly ready to lay down the law, he barks his orders. Don't break anything, train my men, and then get your freak show out of my city. Ansal shrugs and agrees, even offering the Count a spot as his next personal training client. Shockingly, the old man doesn't immediately explode at the suggestion. But as they walk out the door, the Count's internal monologue starts labeling Ansal as a reckless, ticking time bomb. He settles back onto his throne, plotting his next move. Given how much the people love Riona, he calculates how this whole monster situation could sway his popularity. With a wicked grin, he realizes this muscle circus might be the golden ticket he's been waiting for. He immediately barked orders for his servants to summon the Tuchula mercenaries. The Count was betting that the general's reckless request would eventually force those monsters to show their true colors, making her drown in regret for her choices. Over at the military drills, a squad of soldiers was busy grinding through their standard training routines. Suddenly, a sharp command cut through the air, halting them for a special surprise session scheduled for that day. Their new guest instructor? None other than our buff protagonist, the Lord of Ghouls, hand-delivered by the general herself. The troops were losing their minds. They had zero interest in taking notes from a monster and couldn't fathom how he got the job. Sticking strictly to the chain of command, their regular sergeant reminded them that orders are absolute and they better get their heads in the game. Ansal stepped up and introduced himself, coolly stating he was the specialist coach sent to fix their pathetic workout habits. Since he wasn't feeling the disrespectful glares he was getting, he ordered the entire squad to hit the deck. The soldiers looked toward China, who was busy dying of secondhand embarrassment from the whole awkward scene. Leading by example, our hero dropped into a perfect push-up stance, telling the disobedient runts to follow suit. Right behind him, every single ghoul in his entourage mirrored his movements with terrifying precision. The protagonist asked one last time, were these soldiers in a drop for their sets, or was there a problem? China was the first to show some backbone, immediately dropping down to follow Ansal's lead. One hot-headed cadet scoffed at the pathetic display. He wanted to know if his brothers in arms were actually low enough to take orders from a literal forest monster. The sergeant warned the kid not to run his mouth. Ansal was a VIP guest, and disrespecting him was basically spitting in the general's face. Even so, the cadet doubled down, asking his superior if he'd really lost his pride, and if a monster's whim now carried the same weight as the general's. That little monster comment was the spark that officially set our protagonist's temper ablaze. The instructor didn't say a word, his silence screaming that he actually agreed with the kid's petty worldview. The cadet ordered everyone to stand back up, preaching that they needed to keep their human dignity by rejecting a beast's authority. Our hero didn't see what the big deal was, while the sergeant kept insisting that a direct order is a direct order. But the cadet argued that his humanity came first. Plus, regarding the training the protagonist was pushing, he claimed that anything besides swordplay was a total waste of time. Finally, leveling his blade at our protagonist's throat, he spat that he had no intention of learning tricks from an uncivilized savage. Before Ansal could snap, Gordon stepped in, flashing a smirk that said he had this entire mess under control. He suggested that China could act as the protagonist's proxy to teach them, asking the brave soldiers if that was still too much for them. As for the utility of the pump versus the sword, he proposed a duel to let the results speak for themselves. Lastly, on the whole civilized debate, they let a good old-fashioned brawl decide who was truly superior. Gordon turned back to his ghoul squad, asking if they were ready for some action. Every single one of them began flexing their mountain-sized muscles, declaring they were born for this moment. Seeing all that built-up confidence, the protagonist felt like a proud dad. The ghouls were finally leveling up. The cadet took the bait and asked his instructor for the green light to fight. With a simple, dismissive nod, the sergeant gave the duel his blessing. Since the cadet was repping the human side, he wanted to know which beast would be his punching bag. A massive, jacked-to-the-gills ghoul stepped forward, looking exactly like a wall of meat. The cadet grinned like a villain, because he isn't just a regular soldier. That monster just walked into a death trap. He was about to unleash the savage fury of the Tuchula mercenaries, the Count's personal hired killers. The mercenary exploded forward in a lethal lunge. Closing the gap, he hissed a death threat, but the ghoul didn't even blink. The ghoul's response? A simple one-arm overhead smash. He pulverized the mercenary's face so hard that 11 out of 10 people would have met their maker instantly. The poor guy was sent flying like a rag doll. Our hero went to check the body, worried he'd just witnessed a murder, but one ghoul noted a slight twitch, so he was either alive or lagging. The mercenary stayed out cold. Our protagonist immediately started scolding his ghoul for having zero chill and going way too hard. But the lecture didn't really stick since the ghoul was just trying to be a good student. Regardless, the monsters won the bet, and it was time for the humans to start following the program. Suddenly, the mercenary's survival instinct triggered his second wind combat skill. His body surged with a mysterious, dark energy. It looked like he was just refreshed enough for another round of being a punching bag. In a flash, he vanished from his spot, moving at supersonic speeds. The mercenary was going for a cowardly backstab. He'd rather die than take orders from a subhuman creature. The poor ghoul was looking the wrong way, totally oblivious to the blade at his back. However, Gordon was 10 steps ahead, activating his gravity skill to crank the weight of the area to the absolute max. Crushed by the sudden 10-fold increase in his own weight, the mercenary's epic ambush was stopped dead in its tracks. The one who was really fed up with the drama was our protagonist. He started stomping toward the traitor, ready to dish out some educational discipline through pure, unadulterated pain. Ansal barely even tapped the degenerate's chest. But that tap had the force of a wrecking ball, launching the guy through the air and shattering the stone wall behind him. The mercenary was now pinned to the wall like a piece of cursed modern art in a high-end gallery. The agony was total. He was stuck there, unable to move a muscle or even scream. After all the chaos, the general finally decided to swing by the training ground to check on the progress. She was hyped to see how the protagonist's secret sauce had transformed her elite troops. Instead, she found a massive mob of soldiers arguing loudly about whether or not they'd just seen illegal magic. The men were pointing fingers at the ghouls, swearing they used sorcery and were therefore total cheaters. Baffled by the circus, the general turned to the instructor, demanding to know what the hell was going on. On one side stood the protagonist, and on the other, the sergeant. He explained that a riot broke out because some of the hotheads refused to follow the general's direct orders. The humans got their butts kicked in the duel, but they were now coping by claiming the monsters used cheat codes. Approaching our hero, the general asked him straight up if any magic was involved in the smackdown. Ansal simply stated that they only rely on the Church of Gains, no magic needed. That wasn't quite enough for her, so she shifted her gaze to the sweating, nervous sergeant. He stammered that he didn't see any mana used, meaning it was all pure, raw muscle. Just then, a voice asked if he was really going to side with the beasts. It was the Count himself, drawn out by the wild rumors spreading through the castle. He barked an order for a full report on the day's insanity. Furthermore, he demanded to know where the general's loyalty lay, with her own kind, or with these filthy forced freaks. Looking visibly insulted, the general stated clearly that she is, and always will be, on the side of her people. That response pushed the Count over the edge. He wanted to know whose people she was even talking about anymore. Ansal, being Ansal, thought the Count was just there for a leg day session and told him to get off his high horse. But Gordon smelled the danger. He leaned in and whispered that the Count definitely wasn't here for the squats. The Count looked at the general and asked if she realized how much he'd favored her. She gave a dry yes. Continuing his power trip, the Count claimed the trash she'd brought into his city was causing a massive public disturbance. One of his top recruits was currently a permanent fixture in a stone wall, and that was a PR nightmare he couldn't ignore. He declared he could no longer overlook her treasonous hobbies, which is why he personally came to shut it down. As justice for the incident, he slapped the general with a 2-year exile from the capital. Hit with such a garbage punishment, the general's aura began to boil with pure rage. The malicious energy she radiated was so terrifying that even the Count's survival instincts kicked in, immediately ruining his expensive silk underwear. The soldiers hated the call, too. They begged the Count to reconsider, wanting a chance to finish off the monsters themselves. But the Count was way too busy trying to act natural while hiding the fact that he'd just soiled himself. The general turned and apologized to Ansal. She felt like a failure for not protecting his people after inviting them here. Ansal just shrugged, knowing life doesn't always follow the perfect training routine, and told her not to sweat the small stuff. The general asked if she could at least keep the ghouls here for 3 more months. Having completely lost his nerve, the Count quickly nodded and agreed. The general realized that despite the drama, her secret preparations were now fully complete. And that's when she let a truly wicked, all according to plan smile slip. Leveraging her last moments of authority, she ordered the rowdy soldiers to shut their traps. They were questioning the Lord's mercy, and as soldiers, their only job was to obey. A few tried to protest, but she shut them down with a glare that could freeze fire. She saw right through them. They were just bitter that the monsters were better than them, and they had the gall to blame her for it. But she saw an opening for real change. She just needed to let this new reality simmer. She actually thanked the Lord's punishment for making this happen. She hoped this 3-month boot camp would flip these weaklings' worlds upside down. It was going to be hilarious to see the results when she returned. Now the general walks away with a devious smirk, knowing those arrogant soldiers are about to get a taste of their own medicine. Night falls. A man slips out of the castle clutching a heavy sack of gold. It's that idiot mercenary. With this payout, retirement is in sight. He dreams of opening a flower shop for his lady. But such soft, romantic thoughts leave the hardened killer feeling pretty embarrassed. He gazes at a portrait of his daughter, whispering a promise that he'll be home soon. Elsewhere, That very same portrait is currently being reduced to ash by a growing inferno. His hometown has been utterly raided and turned into a graveyard of cinders. A massive horde of ghouls marches through the heart of the smoldering ruins. From a nearby hilltop, a mysterious figure watches the carnage unfold with sadistic curiosity. This knockoff Joker looks like he's having the absolute time of his life amidst the slaughter. Sensing a presence behind him, he greets a woman named Elisa, remarking that it's been far too long. This is a squad of complete freaks, and they seem to be thoroughly enjoying the warm welcome they've unleashed on their own people. Extending a hand to Elisa, the Joker asks if she'd like to share a dance. At first, the girl completely ignores his theatrical gesture. But eventually, she decides to play along and reaches out to take his hand. The two begin a macabre dance on that lonely hilltop, while the city below is slowly incinerated. The very next morning, the soldiers gather at the gates to bid the general a formal farewell. She's surprised to see China standing there, lugging around a mountain of gear. He explains there's no official training today, and he heard a meeting was happening. So, he asked for the protagonist's blessing to accompany the general on her journey for a while. They're now off to visit that place. China grows anxious, fearing the Count's wrath if they're caught. But she reassures him with a grin, saying she's more than capable of handling the old man. Those words fire China up, and he proudly promises to lead the way. She notices China's voice has grown deeper and more resonant, a clear sign of his physical evolution. With a mischievous wink, she promises she might even marry him if he grows a bit more backbone. However, China is in his 20s and suspects the general is pushing 60, so the offer feels more like a threat. A murderous aura instantly erupts from the woman. Her disciples have to physically hold her back. She does not take comments about her age lightly. Deep in the forest, a ghoul is stalking his next target, a humble slime. He finally manages to ghost his way right behind the jelly-like creature. He ignites his muscle fibers to deliver a lethal, bone-crunching strike. The ghoul snatches his victim and exerts intense isometric force, but apparently, it's just a specialized workout. His partner asks about his recent arm injury, warning him not to overdo it. Luckily, he's solid. Now, they need to hustle back to the protagonist, who promised to unveil a brand new exercise. The general, spotting the ghouls in the brush, asks why they're hauling those slimes around like groceries. The ghouls are shocked to see humans, especially since China was supposed to head back to camp. China tells them the time for the big reveal has finally arrived. The general stands there baffled, as her original question is still hanging in the air. The ghoul explains they need the slimes because Ansal requested them. They're just following the master's orders. This sparks Riona's curiosity, as she knows those monsters are usually useless for everything. So, the ghoul invites her to tag along, suggesting it's better to witness the gained science in person. The general wonders if Ansal is keeping secrets from his own men, but the ghoul denies it. China interrupts to explain that these big guys are just hilariously bad at explaining things. Looking at the two small, friendly monsters, she decides to follow them into the clearing. After trekking through the woods, they finally rendezvous with the king of Gaines, Ansal. Our boy didn't expect China to swing by, let alone the general herself. The woman says she stopped by for a final goodbye and to see what kind of weirdness they were up to. Pointing at the pile of squirming slimes, she asks what on earth they're planning. Ansal observed the troops at the training ground and realized that standard bodybuilding wasn't enough for their lifestyle. They need something more athletic and functional, but since they lack equipment, he's going to DIY some. The general thinks making gear out of slimes sounds like a headache, imagining a practice dummy for sword slashes. Our boy tells her to forget the sword and asks for a slime. Step 1. Secure the equipment. Step 2. Do this. Our protagonist pierces the slime with his bare hand like a boss. With surgical precision, he manages to yank out the creature's core. Once the core is removed, the slime will completely regenerate its body in a few days. So they set the core aside to let the biological printing process do its thing. Now he's boring a hole into the coreless jelly. Slimes possess incredible elasticity and snapback potential. In this way, he can use the monster's body exactly like a heavy-duty resistance band. He's literally transformed a monster into high-end training equipment. The general might not know it, but you can crush a full-body workout with this. Resistance depends on the slime's color. While our boy is geeking out on gear, the general suddenly drops a heavy apology. It feels too sudden to Ansal, and he doesn't quite get where she's coming from. So, she admits that she had her suspicions about his true motives. She thought he was obsessing over training just to manipulate humans into liking him. But the truth is, he's been 100% authentic and honest with everyone from day one. She feels like she failed as an educator, unable to cure the deep-seated prejudice of her own kingdom. That's why she tolerated the Count's absolute lack of common sense for so long. However, she now recognizes that Ansal is built different. He's the only one who can actually change this nation. Our boy seems to feel the immense weight of that heroic challenge. Violently flexing his traps, he says change is his specialty, but the general clarifies she didn't mean his muscle shape. Then our boy calls his ghouls over to flex in unison, offering a group change, but the general, actually, she realizes she was talking about that kind of awe-inspiring change, after all. She tosses her cape into the morning air, revealing that she isn't alone. Several of her students have followed her. She says they aren't all idiots and are genuinely hungry for the knowledge Ansal possesses. Though nervous, some are still skeptical about doing weird things like floor exercises. The general asks if she can officially leave her boys in Ansal's capable, calloused hands. Our protagonist is shocked to see such a huge crowd of potential lifters, but he clenches his fist, radiating pure determination, stating that she can trust him to turn them into absolute units. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a cavalry unit advances through the dark forest. The Count is leading these men personally, and they've just halted their march. They've reached the outskirts of the destroyed city, and they're currently investigating the grisly aftermath. The enemies are ghouls, and the nightmare is real. One bite, and you're part of the horde. The Count warns his men to be extremely cautious of every shadow. He draws his sword and rallies his troops, declaring that they must charge toward the heart of the battle. As they enter the city, danger closes in on them from all sides, unaware that they're being watched by that troop of recap eccentrics. The Joker signals one of his companions to hold their position. If they jump in now, the general might appear and ruin the fun. But the dog creature keeps barking, trembling with violent excitement. Annoyed, the Joker punishes the beast, saying it's not time to play yet. Even after the hit, the dog stays loyal. The Joker says they must wait just a little longer. Soon, everyone gets to join the dance. The truth is, these rampaging ghouls are just the appetizer for the chaos to come. Meanwhile, at the training ground, humans and ghouls are finally working side by side. The protagonist explains there's a limited stamina pool per day, so they have to prioritize the money muscles. The instructor shouts to see if everyone's ready to use the slime gear for the bench press. However, our protagonist shakes his head. They aren't lifting heavy today. It's time for some soul-crushing CrossFit. But the instructor is standing there looking clueless, having no idea what that word even means. It's a peak functional training method that mashes together all sorts of high-intensity movements into one brutal circuit. This way, they can hammer every single muscle group, keeping their physical stats perfectly balanced and stage-ready. By splitting into squads, they'll spark a competitive fire. There's no better way to build broship than suffering through a shared workout. Our boy has already drafted the rosters. Enough talk. It's time to move some weight. The trainees are looking hyped, eyes locked in and ready to crush this session. Meanwhile, the Count's front line is locked in a desperate, bloody struggle against those forest freaks. But back at the HQ training grounds, the only thing being killed is the student's ego as they put in that work. While the soldiers out in the field are busy taking heads, the ones who stay behind are busy moving cold, heavy iron. As the army pierces ghouls with cold steel, our protagonist is busy drilling his students through brand new, soul-crushing routines. That's when Ansal's hawk, I picked up on something interesting. The emergency siren had been wailing across the grounds for a while, so he asked the instructor what the deal was. The instructor explained that the feudal lord is currently purging the ghouls that have been raiding the borders. That signal is a high-level distress call. They're begging for backup, meaning the enemy is way more jacked than they anticipated. Ansal noticed Group 4's form was slipping and barked at them to drop the weight to keep it clean. When the instructor tried to interrupt, he couldn't believe our hero was so chill while a literal war was popping off nearby. Back on the front lines, the feudal lord is gassing up his troops after a small win. Scouts just reported that the enemy's main hive is right at the end of this trail. He vows to wipe them off the map and bring peace back to the realm once and for all. The soldiers erupt in a massive cheer, riding the high of their recent kill streak. Then, the Lord rallies them one last time. It's time to charge into the heart of darkness. The army storms forward, blades drawn and ready to unleash a total massacre on the ghoul horde. A chaotic bloodbath ensues, but the Lord's advisor is starting to get a bad feeling about this. They've overextended way too deep into the woods, which is a tactical nightmare. However, the Lord is convinced ghouls are just brainless meat puppets with zero strategy. He thinks raw numbers and brute force are all he needs. Certain his plan is flawless, the feudal lord points toward the front line as they continue to push. He screams at his men to keep the pressure on and not give the monsters an inch. They need to keep grinding through the forest until every last one of those freaks is deleted. Watching the whole disaster from the shadows is the Joker. For him, this is better than a front row seat at the circus. Deep in the thicket, the Joker suddenly finds himself surrounded by the Count's elite guard. But with a single theatrical snap of his fingers, his own freak show companions emerge from the dark to back him up. The puppet master behind this entire bloody mess has finally stepped into the light. After eyeing the army, the Joker sneered that the soldiers missed a day-one tactic. They should have brought spears to a monster fight. Swords are only good for looking cool while doing useless, fancy techniques. With a flick of his wrist, he sends his crew in. The soldiers are being absolutely dismantled. They are completely helpless against the overwhelming speed and violence of these new enemies. The feudal lord decides to carry the team, unsheathing his own blade to end the chaos personally. Recognizing the old man, the Joker chuckles, noting it's been a hot minute since their last reunion. Moving like a glitch in a matrix, the Joker effortlessly parries the Lord's desperate strike. Sensing the old man's power fading, he taunts him about how much he's let himself go in his old age. Shocked by the Joker's youthful appearance, the Lord stammers, wondering how he hasn't aged a single day. The Joker mocks him, saying the Lord can't manipulate energy with the finesse of a general. In reality, the Joker didn't waste time training his inner mana the old-fashioned way. Instead, he's been busy with some illegal research, flashing syringes filled with a glowing, nasty-looking cocktail. He slams the needle into his own arm, triggering a gruesome, bone-cracking transformation. The Joker's frame begins to balloon to an impossible scale. His muscles are pulsating with unnatural power. The Lord realizes the man has literally fused his DNA with that serum. He's a skyscraper made of meat now. Realization hits. The Joker has been using humans as lab rats. And based on that twisted grin, ethics aren't exactly on the Joker's radar. Getting no response, the Lord realizes the Joker's mind has transcended into some dark, cosmic roid rage dimension. He needs a plan, and he needs it 5 minutes ago, before the other monsters swarm him. The Lord knows he has to go for a one-shot kill on the Joker immediately. He begins to channel every drop of his combat aura into his blade. Gathering his remaining strength, he launches a final, desperate lunge to end the duel. But as he closes in, he's blindsided by a palm the size of a dinner table. The Joker swats the feudal lord with world-ending violence, shattering the old man's defense and his bones in one go. Coughing up blood in the dirt, the Lord tries to process how the Joker's power ceiling moved so high. But he doesn't have time for a monologue as the Joker looms over him for the finishing blow. The old man barely rolls out of the way of the impact. However, he knows deep down that if that fist had connected, he'd be a permanent part of the forest floor. In a heartbeat, the Joker is on him again. The old man is forced into a desperate, trembling block. He tells himself if he can just time the pattern, there might be a one chance of survival. So he burns the last of his energy to trigger his ultimate combat skill. But this wasn't for glory. It was a pure, pathetic survival instinct. The Lord's sword is vibrating like it's about to snap. The gap in raw power is too wide, and from the sheer force of the impact, the feudal lord is launched into the air like a discarded toy, bouncing off tree trunks like a human pinball. The old man somehow survives the flight, though he's barely clinging to life. He tries to grip his hilt one last time, but his nervous system has officially left the building. As his sword slips into the mud, the old man realizes the situation is a total wipeout. He's out to fight, but what kills him more than the pain is the mystery of where the Joker found such demonic strength. As the giant approaches, the Joker knows the old man's head is spinning with questions. He mocks him, calling this the next step in evolution, and laughs that the Lord thought he'd lose his mind during the bulk. He tells the Lord he lost because he's a dinosaur who only believes in swordplay. That's why he's weak. After all these decades, the Lord hasn't made a single gain in his life. The old man snaps back that the Joker knows exactly how strong the general is, so he should quit the trash talk. With a dark smirk, the Joker admits he knows that muscle mommy very well. But the Lord is ignoring the reality right in front of his dying eyes. He tells him to take a good, long look at the field. The Joker points toward the carnage behind them. The feudal Lord turns his head, dreading what he's about to see. His eyes are met with a scene from a horror movie. One of the Joker's freaks is solo leveling through the Lord's entire elite army. His men are being ripped apart like they were made of cheap plastic parts. The Joker calls it a literal slaughter. There was zero hope for the humans caught in the massive human blender whirlpools. He muses that there's always a bigger fish, but the Lord shouldn't have even bothered showing up to this pond. The bloodbath is so total that the fallen soldiers are already rising as fresh ghouls. The feudal Lord can't fathom that his entire life's work, his army, is being erased. This actually amuses the Joker, seeing the old man refuse to accept his game over screen. Running out of patience for the chat, the giant prepares to stomp the life out of him. But out of the shadows, a hidden sword technique flashes through the night, slicing deep into the Joker's massive hand. It's the Lord's faithful advisor, finally jumping into the fray. He tells the old man to bolt for it while he stays behind to buy him a few seconds of life. But the advisor is suddenly left speechless. The feudal Lord had already hit the sprint button. He didn't even wait for the advisor to finish his heroic speech. Even the Joker was stunned by the feudal Lord's pathetic retreat. For him, seeing such cowardice was the final straw. He feels a wild surge of dark amusement bubbling up in his chest, until finally he can't hold it back and bursts into a fit of uncontrollable, maniacal laughter. At the end of the day, that old man is a creature of habit. He'd sacrifice anyone just to save his own wrinkled skin. Realizing the ship is sinking, the advisor screams the final order: full retreat. This isn't a fight anymore, it's a massacre. He barks at the survivors to run as if the devil himself is nipping at their heels. They have to stick to the feudal Lord's trail if they want even a one chance of seeing tomorrow. But mid-command, the advisor's survival instincts scream he's run out of time. One of the Joker's titan-sized hands slams down, crushing the man and snapping his sword like a dry twig. The shattered remnants of the army are now scattering into the woods in pure, unadulterated terror. The dim-witted ghoul minion grunts at the Joker, asking if he should hunt down the stragglers. Shrinking back to his human size, the Joker declines. He knows exactly where those rats are scurrying to. He's banking on the old man's predictable stupidity. He'll surely try to muster one last, desperate defense. Little does the Lord know, his strategic retreat is playing right into the Joker's hands. Mounted on his horse, the feudal Lord gallops away in total disgrace, his mind reeling from the defeat. He's completely lost, with no clue how to even dent the power of those evolved monsters. It's a literal living hell on Earth. Meanwhile, back at the gym, our protagonist is busy crushing an infinite set of reps. It's supernatural. The man seems to have deleted the word exhaustion from his vocabulary. The Lord's shattered army continues their panic flight toward the castle walls. The old man gasps for air, asking if there's anyone left who can actually tally the damage of this disaster. A blonde officer named Rum steps up with a grim report. The toll is heavy. They've lost 347 brothers in arms. Of those left, 427 are bleeding out, leaving only 26 soldiers actually fit for duty. The Lord realizes he's down to a skeleton crew of 100 castle guards and a bunch of green cadets. He's staring at a dead end, wondering how he can possibly hold the line with such a pathetic force. Rum suggests their only hope is to swallow their pride and recall the general. But the old man knows the clock is ticking. She'll never make it back before the Joker knocks on their door. Seeing no other way out, the girl points to the monsters currently squatting in their training center. She's heard the rumors. Ansal went toe-to-toe with the general, which means he's a walking nuke. Since they're providing the roof and the rations, it's time to call in a favor from these muscle-bound freaks. The Lord ponders the irony, using monsters to exterminate monsters. He starts to love the sound of that, declaring he'll put his new expendables to work immediately. After 3 days of hard riding, the broken Lord finally limps back into his fortress. He doesn't even head to the throne room. He marches straight for the training grounds. He bellows for everyone to drop the weights and assemble before their master. Our hero is genuinely confused by the sudden, dramatic interruption of his workout. The Lord's blonde aide snaps at the ghouls, calling them fools and demanding instant obedience. Ansal and his squad of jacked ghouls slowly loom over the aging Lord. Sizing up the protagonist, the feudal lord asks if he's the one they call Ansal. Our boy nods, innocently asking if the Lord finally came down to get a pump and start his fitness journey. The old man scoffs. He's not here for a sweat. He's here to issue a cold, hard command. He barks that it's time for these inferior creatures to pay back the debt for all the oaths they've inhaled. Their new mission: move to the front line and annihilate the ghoul army marching on the castle. Ansal's crew exchanges wary glances. Gordon looks like he's smelling something rotten. The Lord barks again, wondering if they're too brain-dead to understand his simple instructions. He claims he's being generous, giving these subhumans a chance to die with a shred of honor on the battlefield. He even dangles the carrot of citizenship if they survive. It's the ultimate test of whether all those weird exercises actually translate to killing power. Ansal doesn't argue. He just turns to his team and roars the command. Double biceps flex. The ghouls take a massive, lung-bursting breath in perfect unison. They strike a pose, showcasing a level of muscularity that defies every law of nature. The old man stares in total confusion, having no idea why these monsters are flexing in his face. Ansal explains that they've built these temples through the holy ritual of exercise, and this is the sacred mandatory pose to show off the hard-earned results of the grind. Losing his temper, the Lord screams that he isn't in the mood for a comedy show and demands they march. But Ansal's aura flips to pure fury, stating that if his students die, their training journey ends, and that is unacceptable. He stares the Lord down, asking if he's prepared to take responsibility for the catabolic disaster of losing all those gains. The Lord has no clue what catabolism means, but sensing Ansal's terrifying killing intent, he nearly vomits as cold sweat drenches his back. Terrorized by the sheer pressure, the old man stammers out a pathetic apology for his words. He quickly gestures for his guards to follow him as he makes a dignified, but very fast, exit. Ansal instantly chills out and turns back to the cadets. All right, rest is over, back to the iron. His aide tells him to try one more time, but the Lord has seen enough. Those monsters answer to a different god, the pump. He decides it's time to call in General Buey, a move that makes his aide turn pale with shock. The Lord knows Buey is a total prick with a nasty attitude, but he's a beast on the battlefield, equal to the general. The order is given. Every able-bodied soldier is to rally at the main castle gates. They're going to show those ghouls that humanity still has some teeth left. The troops take their positions on the ramparts, eyes peeled for the incoming storm. A grizzled veteran with a fierce mohawk stands among them. That's the infamous General Buey. The Lord is there too, gripping the stone wall in fear as a massive tide of darkness finally washes up to their doorstep. Buey tells his archers to hold their fire, eyes narrowing as he watches the horizon. He spots a pattern. These aren't just roaming beasts. They're being controlled by a mastermind. He figures he'll offer a chance for a chat before the red mist descends on everyone. From the center of the ghoul horde, the Joker saunters toward the castle walls. He's got his freak show squad and that mysterious woman, Elisa, flanking him. The old man's heart skips a beat as he recognizes a face from the past. That woman is none other than Elisa herself. The Joker mocks them, calling their high-walled defense rude and asking what the little humans want to talk about. Buey knows they're outnumbered, but the castle is a fortress. Taking it by force will be a bloodbath. So, he proposes a classic duel. A champion from each side fights, and the winner takes the glory. The Joker laughs, loving the theatricality of it, and accepts the challenge on the spot. Buey grins, his blood already boiling. He's a man who lives for the sound of snapping bones. He leaps from the battlements, a human meteor ready to sow terror in the enemy ranks. He lands with a thud, taunting the Joker to send out their most courageous victim. Out steps the special ghoul, looking like he was chosen just to be a warm-up. The creature shambles toward Buey, mouth moving as if it's trying to remember how to speak. But it gives up on words and just lets out a guttural, soul-piercing screech instead. Buey draws his blade, unimpressed by the size of the beast. He's ready to see if all that mass actually translates to real combat skill. Buey strikes first like a lightning bolt, aiming to cleave the beast in two, But the special ghoul possesses a level of strength that defies logic. He catches the general's heavy blade with his bare hands, stopping the momentum dead. Bui realizes he's dealing with a tank, but he's still confident he can crack the armor. Using the close range, he begins raining down a storm of blows on the ghoul's torso. The creature just stands there, tanking the hits like a stone wall, completely unfazed. Until suddenly, it hacks something up and spits it directly at the general's face. Bui's instincts save him as he ducks the projectile just in time. The liquid hisses as it hits the ground. Pure acid. One hit and the general would have been history. Genuinely curious now, Bui asks what kind of twisted ritual made the creature's skin so impenetrable. But the special ghoul just stares back with empty eyes, unable to even remember his own name. Then, he shifted gears and began moving with the speed of a lightning strike. Bui smirked, thinking his opponent was tucking tail and trying to buy some breathing room. But the general isn't about to let his prey slip away. This duel is a dance of death that only ends when a heart stops beating. Bui lunges forward, ready to sink his claws into the retreating coward. Little did he know, he was walking straight into the low IQ ghoul's elaborate trap. Suddenly, the general felt a cold shiver. The flow of the battle was starting to feel unervingly off. The Lord screamed from the ramparts for the general to look out. A jagged bone fragment was whistling through the air right at him. With a reflex born of 1,000 battles, the general whipped his blade up to parry the projectile. Fuming, he roars out, demanding to know what bottom feeder dares to interrupt a sacred trial by combat. The culprit? A mangy dog barking its head off just to shatter the general's focus. In that split second of distraction, Bui was blindsided by a bone-shattering blow to the spine, delivered by none other than the Joker. Flexing his anabolic-enhanced frame, the Joker spat on the idea of a sacred duel. There was only one tactical reason he even humored the general's proposal. Bui was the only dangerous wild card left standing inside those stone walls. The general had chased the slow bait right into a kill zone, and now he's face down in the dirt, catching a brutal lesson in reality. The Joker chuckled, mocking the general for having the brain of an actual ox, just like his name suggests. The Lord watches the slaughter in total despair. The big bear stands frozen on the wall, watching his superior get dismantled in complete disbelief. Broken and beaten, the general actually finds himself groveling, begging for a mercy he never showed his own enemies. While still tenderizing the man's face with his fists, the Joker casually lied and said he'd spare him. With a lazy flick of his wrist to the slow ghoul, the creature scooped up the general's mangled, twitching body, launching the man into the sky like a discarded toy. Bui was too far gone to even understand what was happening to his broken frame. But as gravity took hold, the horrifying truth dawned on him. He was being fed directly into the maws of the starving horde. Seconds later, he had officially joined the very army of the undead he was sworn to destroy. The feudal lord felt his heart drop into his stomach. His strongest shield had just been shattered. From the shadows below, the Joker's voice drifted up, telling him to just drop the gates and surrender. Maybe then, he'd get to keep his head. But the old man finds his spine for once. He'd never hand his people over to a monster who threw away his own soul. The Joker's smile vanished. The deal is dead, and that old man's life is officially forfeit. He raised a hand toward the battlements and gave the final, cold command for the legion of the dead to swarm. The sea of ghouls surges forward, a tide of rot heading straight for the main gates. Panic-stricken, the Lord screams for the archers to rain fire, but looking at his line, most of them are just terrified peasants who don't even know which end of the battle to hold. The old man's anxiety hits a fever pitch, and the girl at his side trembles, asking what on earth they're supposed to do to survive this. After a long, agonizing moment of deep contemplation, he looks her dead in the eye and admits he hasn't got the foggiest idea. The sheer honesty of his hopelessness leaves the girl completely shell-shocked. Without missing a beat, the Lord is overcome by his survival instincts and begins sprinting away from the walls. He's diving deeper and deeper into the heart of the castle, looking for a hole to crawl into. He knows his reputation. He's the world-class champion of cowards. His entire life has been a highlight reel of running away whenever things got too hot. Even the general knew the Lord was famous for folding like a cheap lawn chair under pressure. A scholar once joked this was actually a talent, since the man prioritizes his pulse over his pride every single time. In a flash of memory, he sees the face of a woman he lost to the enemy. In every crisis, his only move was to keep his legs moving in the opposite direction. He realizes the crown is heavy. But wait, this isn't a random retreat. It's a tactical sprint. He's heading straight for the training grounds. Kicking the doors open, the old man collapses, howling for someone to save his hide. He prostrates himself, apologizing for calling them monsters and admitting he's a total moron. "Kill me if you want," he cries. "But please save the innocent souls out there." He's literally begging our protagonist's crew to intervene. After listening to the pathetic plea, Ansal just looks down and asks if the old man is here to finally get a workout in since he's already warmed up. The Lord's brain completely short-circuits. He's never been more confused in his life. Casually stretching his delts, Ansal says he doesn't care about the man's life. But his personal trainer fee for dealing with this mess just hit an all-time high. The instructor and the human rookies stand up, shouting that they're ready to bleed for the city too. But our boy tells the level 1 newbies to sit this one out before they get hurt. The ghouls back him up, growling that anyone without a 400 kilograms big 3 total needs to stay in the locker room. That was the cold, hard truth of the Iron Path, and they gave the rookies a look so intimidating it could have melted lead. The Lord is certain these monsters are absolute gym-obsessed idiots, and yet he can feel it. Under all that terrifying mass, they've got hearts of pure gold. With his elite squad in tow, the protagonist begins the march toward the breach. There's a direct line to the gate, and they aren't planning on taking the scenic route. Since time is money, Ansal calls for some high-intensity interval training. They start with a brisk power walk to get the blood flowing, then explode into a full-blown sprint, holding that max effort pace for a solid 90 seconds. The only one failing the cardio check is Gordon, who's currently seeing stars and gasping for oxygen, clutching his chest like he's having a cardiac event. He's secretly in awe of the raw, explosive speed his bros are putting out. In the city center, the rogue ghouls are closing in on the cowering civilians. But our protagonist gains brigade crashes in just in time to stop the slaughter. A little girl clutching her mother stares in wide-eyed wonder at the Jack's saviors, whispering that the heroes have finally arrived to save them. After clearing the street, the protagonist keeps the momentum going toward the main gate. A young boy watches them go, starry-eyed, wondering if a sword could ever make him that powerful. But his mother shakes her head. She knows that kind of power didn't come from a blade. They both agree. Once the dust settles, they're going to find out exactly what kind of training those guys are doing. The main gate is shattered, and the chaos is peaking. Our hero activates his hawk eye to scan the field. Looking at the enemy ghouls, he scoffs. They look like they've missed way too many hydration breaks. Finally, Gordon stumbles onto the scene, looking half dead but proud he actually made it. He tries to give a report on the enemy ghouls, but Ansal cuts him off, telling him to fix his posture because slouching is a gain killer. Gordon wheezes out that these wild ghouls are just mindless hunger drones. No brain, just rotting muscle. As he starts liquidating the enemies, the protagonist realizes he doesn't have a shred of pity for these cardio-avoiding zombies. Gordon asks what the master plan is for dealing with the swarm at the gate. Our boy watches the enemies pouring through the breach like a flood. He decides he's just going to push them all back out using nothing but pure, unadulterated chest power. Gordon's jaw hits the floor, noticing the look of pure skepticism on Gordon's face. Ansal raises an eyebrow, prompting Gordon to quickly pivot and swear the plan is absolute genius. That puts a smile on Ansal's face, and he grants Gordon permission to lead the tactical charge, a request. The protagonist approves instantly, now that he's the general of the gym. Gordon taps into his dark creature instincts and starts playing 4D chess. He orders groups 1 and 2 to fan out through the streets and lock down the civilian zones. Groups 3 and 4 are sent to the ramparts to give the human archers some much-needed backbone and muscle. Meanwhile, Group 5 is tasked with being the personal support squad for the protagonist's big push. But as he watches Ansal start working, Gordon realizes the man is a one-man army who doesn't need a single bit of help. As ridiculous as it sounded on paper, the chest A defense was working like a charm. Suddenly, a desperate voice roared to seal the breach. It was the feudal lord, barking orders because even though our hero shoved the horde back, that broken gate was still a gaping invitation for a massacre. If they didn't lock it down right that second, the city was history. But his aide screamed back in a panic that the gate was total scrap metal. There wasn't a single plank or beam left to plug the hole. The situation had officially hit code red. However, China was 10 steps ahead of everyone. Backed by a squad of ghouls, he was hauling a massive custom-made iron dumbbell onto the front lines. The old man did a double take, recognizing China as the general's supposedly useless disciple. The Lord Assistant stared in awe, wondering what kind of madman forge could even produce a weight that gargantuan. Our protagonist looked on, a proud smirk crossing his face at the sight of his students. The ghoul squad kept grinding, pouring every ounce of effort into moving that heavy metal, with China right in the thick of it, pushing his human limits to help his brothers. But the weight was legendary. Even the ghouls were starting to redline, their undead muscles screaming under the strain. China shouted words of encouragement, refusing to let the momentum die. One ghoul admired his human bro's optimism, but he knew if they tore a tendon moving this thing, the injury would be a total game killer for their future training. With his tank empty, the ghoul finally hit failure and let go, leaving China momentarily inspired, but also in a world of trouble. The sudden shift of weight onto China's shoulders was soul-crushing. His knees buckled, and for a second, the world started to go dark. Just as he was about to collapse, the pressure eased. He was still standing, holding the impossible. Reinforcements had arrived. Gordon tapped into his gravity powers to lighten the load and ordered Group 5 to pile in and help China reach the finish line. Because it was time to shut the door on these zombies once and for all. China funneled every last drop of his willpower into the task, flanked by his loyal ghoul gym brothers. They were just inches away from reaching the master. Pushing through the burn, they closed the gap, while the protagonist watched with the patient gaze of a proud coach. Even with the help, that massive iron bar was a beast of a burden. But just as their grip was about to fail, the grueling walk finally ended. Boom! They slammed that giant dumbbell right into the breach, sealing the castle shut. Everyone was drenched in sweat, looking like they'd just finished the ultimate set. One ghoul looked so incredibly Chad that the artist actually gave him a chiseled, majestic nose for the occasion. Ansel noted they'd moved the weight with perfect form, protecting their joints even under fire. He gave them the ultimate praise. Now the squad is celebrating with a flex-off, proud of their gains. Even Gordon is hyped. Phase 1 the master plan was a total success. The heavy metal squad finally earned themselves a quick breather. Now, everyone except Groups 1 and 2 has a new mission: repel the invaders. The protagonist's allies stormed up the fortifications, lining the top of the wall like a row of stone statues, ready to have the master's back in this brawl. Using nothing but raw, natty power, they started shoving the enemies back down. One ghoul called out, asking if his form was okay. Ansel shouted back to focus on the mind-muscle connection in the pecs. Taking that to heart, they began performing high-tension muscular flexes that sent enemies flying. But the wild ghouls were feral, driven by a bottomless hunger that didn't care about form. The close-quarters combat was getting dangerous for our Jack crew. The Lord's Assistant screamed a warning. One bite, and it's game over. The infection would turn them. Suddenly, one of our ghouls took a direct hit from a biter. The virus seemed to surge through his veins instantly. His jaw locked, and he started foaming at the mouth in theatrical agony, letting out a blood-curdling scream right in the middle of the war zone. His buddy immediately slapped him upside the head, telling him to stop acting. They're already zombies, so the infection is basically a joke. The Lord's aide stared, her jaw dropping at the sheer absurdity. She couldn't wrap her head around these freaks, but our protagonist squad just laughed it off as a bit of battlefield banter. Playtime was over, though. The enemy horde was surging again. The wild ghouls decided to go for the biggest target, our hero's muscles. One creature lunged to bite his arm, but it was like biting a steel girder. Its teeth shattered into a million pieces. Ansel wasn't a fan of the unwanted touching. He deleted the enemy with a single punch for getting drool on his chiseled physique. Watching from afar, the Joker started to lose his cool. He had no idea where these buff zombies came from. He couldn't compute why a human boy was leading a monster army to save a human city. This was a total glitch in his master plan, but the Joker forced himself to stay cold and analytical. He barked an order for his elite pets to go sink their teeth into the protagonist. They charged our boy, desperate to please their twisted master. Meanwhile, the city's defenders were finally catching their second wind. They were ready to pay back the monsters in blood. The Twink and the Bear duo held the line, blocking every strike from the oncoming wave. High up in the tower, the feudal lord pushed his way to the front and told his aide to step aside. Leaning out the window, he yelled down to our hero. Pointing toward the Joker, he identified him as the snake behind this whole nightmare. But Ansal was buried in a sea of ghouls. He couldn't see the boss through the crowd. The feudal lord told him to just plow straight ahead until he found the freak with the blue hair. Our protagonist took that as a personal challenge. Before moving out, he checked if his bros could hold the fort. The ghouls gave him a thumbs up. Now, our boy had a clear path to the boss. Using his massive chest as a battering ram, he snowplowed through the cursed horde. From the balcony, the feudal lord was speechless. He was watching a literal miracle in motion. The battlefield was being cleared like a lawn mower through grass. It was absolutely legendary. Fuming with rage, the Joker realized his army was just a bunch of useless fodder. He looked to his silent companion for backup. But as usual, that character just stood there, refusing to give the plot even a single line of dialogue. The Joker didn't want to get his hands dirty, but this buff kid was too big of a variable to ignore. He started walking toward our hero, who had finally locked eyes with his blue-haired target. The two powerhouses stared each other down, the air crackling with killing intent. Ansal watched as the Joker's body began to swell unnaturally, charging forward for a devastating opening strike. But our protagonist isn't impressed by muscles built in a lab with cheat codes. The moment they collided, the ground shook as they tested whose strength reigned supreme. Both Ansal and the Joker were locked in a winner-takes-all struggle. The raw power was off the charts, but thanks to his superior frame, our boy held the edge. Shocked, the Joker gasped, asking why a monster would ever fight for pathetic humans. Our hero smirked, declaring he was just protecting his new disciple's gains. He suddenly surged with even more explosive power, crushing the Joker's resistance, who felt true fear for the first time as he was slammed into the dirt like a rag doll. Ansal roared that he'll protect his disciples in this land, no matter what kind of hell breaks loose. The Joker's cocky grin has vanished, replaced by sheer terror as his artificial strength starts to redline against Ansal's raw power. With the villain pinned down, our protagonist lunges forward and crushes the Joker's throat in a massive, vice-like grip. The sheer, overwhelming pressure of that hand made the villain feel like a bug about to be squashed. In a frantic, desperate bid for freedom, the Joker begins hammering our hero with everything he's got. But after taking the best the villain had to offer, Ansal just stares him down and asks, "Is that it? Is that all your power amounts to?" Because now it's officially time for a lesson on what true, peak human strength looks like. Our protagonist begins to ignite every single muscle fiber, pushing his muscular contractions to the absolute limit, while keeping the Joker's face buried in the dirt. He begins to drag the villain across the battlefield like a sack of trash, leaving a massive, jagged trench of destruction in his wake. The Joker's inner circle watches in horror, realizing the invincible boss is currently being turned into a floor mop. Meanwhile, the low IQ ghoul horde is hitting a brick wall as the human soldiers finally find their second wind. Elisa grits her teeth, realizing their perfect plan has just become a total, chaotic mess. She decides the only way to fix this is to step in and delete the variables herself. Her body twists and shifts, sprouting hidden, razor-sharp blades that turn her into a living, lethal weapon. With her loyal hound at her side, she sprints toward the Joker to salvage what's left of the fight. But her path is suddenly blocked by a lethal presence emerging from the dark forest. Before she can reach Ansal, a fierce female warrior with a gleaming blade blocks her path. Elisa freezes, having no clue who this dangerous newcomer could be. Meet the badass aunt of the female general, the legendary swordswoman, Luvia. The two women instantly clash, sparks flying as they lock themselves in a deadly dance of steel. Knowing she's stuck in a stalemate, Elisa commands the dog to keep hunting for the Joker. The loyal beast scurries off to find a master who treats him like garbage. Talk about toxic loyalty. After a flurry of blows, Luvia mocks Elisa, asking if she really thought that amateur technique would work on her. Driven by pure, unadulterated spite, Elisa snarls that her tricks are more than enough to kill. She finally spots a microscopic opening in Luvia's guard and lunges for the kill. Back at the fortress, Gordon is playing 4D chess with gravity, barking at the ghouls to keep the pressure on. With the jack ghouls providing the muscle, they're loading up a massive, experimental catapult. The order is given. They launch a boulder that Gordon has made as light as a feather for maximum velocity. But mid-air, the physics hack ends. The massive rock suddenly regains its mass, screaming through the sky like a vengeful meteorite. Now weighing 10 times its original size, the rock streaks toward the battlefield and detonates in mid-air, showering the enemy ranks with a lethal rain of jagged stone shrapnel. Satisfied with the artillery strike, Gordon tells the ghouls to keep the ammo coming. He then coordinates Team 1 to sweep the village and mop up any stray wild ghouls hiding in the shadows. Group 2 is ordered to hold the gate at all costs and start prepping the emergency repairs. Teams 3 and 4 are the frontline wall, tasked with keeping the horde at bay. The feudal lord watches it all in disbelief. He knew Ansal was a beast, but this chubby strategist is a tactical genius, a true mastermind. It's as if Gordon is seeing the entire war from a God mode perspective, moving pieces with chilling precision. The old man suddenly remembers a fragment of a legend his grandfather told him about a monster who fought for humanity. The hero of the Fourth Great War, the dragon strategist, and that legendary title flashes through the Lord's mind. As he watches Gordon command the battlefield like a seasoned king. Back to the main event. Ansal is still systematically dismantling the Joker. The villain, desperate to turn the tide, pumps more toxins into his veins to force another mutation, transforming his entire arm into a massive, spiked club made of bone and hate. The club swings with bone-shattering speed, aimed directly at the gap in Ansal's ribs. A massive explosion of force echoes across the field. However, Ansal doesn't even budge. He simply flexed his obliques and tanked the hit like a god, while still keeping a one-handed grip on the Joker's neck. The villain realizes with horror that his spiked arm is literally stuck in Ansal's dense muscle mass. Suddenly, a sharp bark echoes from the tree-line as a new threat emerges. The dog has found them, and it immediately launches a barrage of jagged bone projectiles at our hero. This isn't just a physical attack. It's a high-tier blend of wind magic and necromancy. Those bones are as hard as tempered steel, propelled by wind pressure strong enough to pop a human head like a grape. The attacks slam into Ansal's back, but despite the direct hits, he doesn't even flinch. For Ansal, this lethal attack feels like a relaxing acupuncture session after a heavy lift. Stunned that its finishing move did nothing, the dog freezes in total confusion until the Joker screams a command. He's being absolutely ragdolled and needs every dirty trick in the book to survive. The villain is officially throwing away his humanity to survive this gympocalypse. After slamming a massive dose of serum into his heart, the Joker laments his lost beauty, shouting that whatever monster he becomes is all Ansal's fault. But our boy knows that no matter how much gear this guy takes, he's not escaping the grind. To Ansal's surprise, the mutation hits a chaotic, unpredictable peak. With a burst of speed, the Joker manages to turn the tables and grab Ansal by the throat. At the same time, Ansal's grip slips because the villain's neck has ballooned into an impossibly wide pillar of muscle. Our protagonist tries to re-clinch, but the Joker's frame is growing too fast to get a solid handle on. Not to mention the Joker is now in a berserker state, unleashing a flurry of blows, landing a haymaker right in Ansal's solar plexus that actually sends him skidding back. Even as he flies back, Ansal looks bored. 0 damage taken. The Joker is on him in a flash, moving with supernatural speed. The villain thinks he's finally got the upper hand, believing he's moving too fast for any normal human eye to track. Too bad for him. Our boy isn't normal. He's using his full muscular potential to masterfully control every single twitch. Ansal is reading the Joker's muscle fiber firing patterns like an open book. At that moment, the Joker sneers that he was saving this final form for a special guest. But since Ansal wanted to play hero, he can die like one. Our boy just ignores the trash talk and hits a perfect abdominal and thigh pose to brace for impact. Every single one of the Joker's lethal strikes is parried by Ansal's iron-hard muscles. But there's still the untapped potential of the white muscle fibers. These don't carry as much oxygen-binding myoglobin, making them the kings of explosive, short burst power. The Joker realizes he's just punching a brick wall, so he desperately tries to switch up his angles. Channeling every drop of his chemical-fueled rage, he delivers a massive, world-ending strike to Ansal's back. Ansal's winning strategy is simple: outlast the freak. He's going to be the ultimate tank until the villain's heart gives out. He just keeps flexing, waiting for the Joker's steroid high to hit the inevitable crash. This is no longer a fight. It's a stamina duel, and the one with the better cardio and conditioning takes the crown. But our protagonist was missing one key piece of the puzzle. The Joker's body wasn't built in a gym. It was built in a lab. He's a walking chemical reaction fueled by that mystery serum. About to take another heavy blow, Ansal assumes the legendary insane pectoral stance while the Joker winds up for what he thinks is the finishing move of the century. The two titans collide again, a brutal symphony of raw power and endurance echoing through the night. Our protagonist realizes he actually has to start getting serious to end this. The feeling is mutual. The Joker has to burn through his entire supply of serum just to make Ansal break a sweat. As the fight drags on, the Joker is losing his mind, trying to understand where this kid's godlike strength comes from. He manages to slip past Ansal's reach, realizing that a direct head-on collision with those arms is a one-way trip to the morgue. Ansal notices a flaw in his foe. You can control the muscle, but controlling the fried nervous system is a different beast entirely. Even our hero is still adjusting to his own rapidly evolving biology. Now, he just needs to keep the pressure on until the Joker's system finally hits total burnout. Meanwhile, back in the chaos, the ghoul with the room temperature IQ is getting swarmed by human guards. He decides to activate his secret move, spinning his massive frame like a human tornado. That spinning back fist Chaos manages to clear some breathing room and send the soldiers flying. Getting absolutely tilted, the low IQ ghoul snarled that these puny humans were just weaklings. Young Ozan knows he's definitely not out-muscling this monster in a 1v1. But he's betting on the one thing this brainless zombie lacks: the power of friendship, which is way more broken than any stat boost. However, before he could even finish his main character move, the poor kid got absolutely flattened by a devastating haymaker from the mentally challenged ghoul. That single punch sent him flying across the battlefield like a ragdoll. Ozan didn't take that disrespect lightly and charged back in, swinging his blunt steel with pure, unadulterated violence. He aimed a killing blow at the ghoul who can't even count to 10, but his swing was way too telegraphed. Despite his massive frame, the ghoul pulled a nothing personal kid and vanished, leaving only the boy's prone body behind. Ozan was already mid-swing and couldn't kill his momentum, but by some stroke of absolute luck, he managed to yank his blade back just enough to keep his friend from getting deleted by friendly fire. Sighing in relief at the near miss, he didn't even notice the brainless tank was already standing behind him, ready to clock his lights out. But right before the killing blow landed, the world seemed to shift. Ozan blinked and realized his enemy had been erased. Something had nuked the ghoul at the very last millisecond. It was actually our protagonist, who had accidentally swiped the creature while busy with his own fight. Totally ignoring the collateral damage he just caused, Ansal went right back to his duel, leaving Ozan standing there with his jaw hitting the floor. He wasn't just saved, he just witnessed something that changed his entire worldview. The boss-level enemy was one shot by a total accident. Right then and there, he decided he needed to join Ansal's gym immediately. Way out on the edge of the kingdom's borders, there's a cozy, peaceful town tucked away by the sea. A frantic messenger had ridden his horse into the ground just to reach the general, scouring every tavern and alleyway to find her. She finally looks up, wondering what's so life or death that the kid had to bust into her house without knocking. Since she was already 3 sheets to the wind and feeling a bit adventurous, she suggested they skip the talk and get straight to the fun stuff. The messenger snapped that it's not the time for her lewd jokes. The castle is literally burning down. The general sighed, telling him to let her finish her drink and catch her breath first. So the messenger blurted out the nightmare. The castle is being swarmed by a literal sea of ghouls. They need her god-tier strength on the front lines right now. Bored, the general claimed the regular army should be able to handle a few zombies. However, the messenger revealed the mastermind is the Joker. That name made the general stop dead in her tracks. Oh, she knows exactly who that clown is. A dark, twisted smirk spread across her face as the memories came flooding back, until she started laughing so hard the poor messenger started backing away in total awkwardness. He tried to stress the urgency again, but the general just waved him off, saying the timing couldn't be more perfect. Honestly, she actually feels a little bit sorry for the absolute beatdown waiting for the Joker. She told the kid there are 2 unbreakable shields currently at the castle. First is her reliable gym bro Ansal, and then there's her adorable niece, Hente. Let's clear the air. This girl is the general's niece, not her aunt. And according to the legend herself, Hente is destined to be the #1 warrior on the entire continent. Back at the fight, Luvia is locked in, 100 focused on the Dance of Death, using her secret arts to slowly dismantle Elisa's defense. This world has already been through a great war that felt like a never-ending nightmare of blood and steel. In the Dark Ages, lifting weights was seen as a sin, and elves were hunted like animals, until a human doctor started preaching the gospel of meditation and elf calisthenics. Because of him, these movement patterns evolved far beyond mere fitness and became the ultimate combat style for the elves. Luvia grew up in their sacred forests, soaking up every bit of their ancient wisdom. She ended up completely mastering the elf workout routine, reaching a level of agility that defies physics. She's so light on her feet, she can literally stand balanced on the edge of her enemy's sword. This wasn't talent. It was 7 years of soul-crushing training where she forged her own unique techniques. Seeing her hovering in midair, Elisa snarled that she couldn't run away just by staying out of reach. Elisa lunges in, closing the gap to deliver what she thinks is the final blow. But Luvia's eyes tell a different story. She's been baiting this all-in move the whole time. Their blades scream as they collide again in a mid-air explosion of sparks. Elisa tries to bully her, using her full body weight to shove the girl back. But Luvia's techniques are built for maximum efficiency and minimum effort. Sliding down the length of the steel, she traps Elisa's blade with her feet. Luvia coldly declared that a one-trick pony like Elisa could never touch her. Despite being completely outclassed, Elisa screamed that she wasn't done yet. But before she could even twitch, she was snared in one of Luvia's trap arts. And now a literal thunderstorm of sword strikes is raining down on her. Luvia mockingly told her she should try that fancy spin move again. Maybe it'll actually work this time. Beyond triggered, Elisa spat back that she doesn't take tips from people she's about to kill. Unleashing a surge of power, Luvia told her it was time to get a reality check. She noticed Elisa's style is a cheap knockoff of her own aunt's legendary swordsmanship. But compared to the real thing, Elisa is just a tiny puddle while the general is a whole ocean. After a few more exchanges, Luvia realized even that comparison was being way too generous to the villain. Miles away, the general is still chugging ale, wondering if someone's talking trash about her because her ears are burning. Elisa goes for a final, desperate gambit, unleashing every hidden blade she has at once. She's determined to end this recapped duel once and for all, sending waves of destructive energy toward Luvia. However, the girl activated physical fortification, tanking every single blade without breaking a sweat. She saw it clearly. Her opponent's balance was completely gone. The time for recap commentary was over. Luvia was ending this now. Flexing every muscle in a display of god-tier flexibility, she lunged with a lethal, finishing strike. But before the killing blow lands, the camera cuts back to our main boy, Ansal. After parrying the last desperate attack, he's just chilling, waiting for the Joker to hit his cardio limit. And sure enough, the villain finally realizes the power gap between them isn't just a gap, it's a canyon. Ansal is wondering why this guy isn't out of breath, while the Joker is losing his mind because his ultimate punches feel like bug bites to Ansal. Still, the clown keeps swinging, trying to find a single weak point in that mountain of muscle. Joker screamed, asking why the hell Ansal hasn't collapsed yet, but Ansal just looked at him and said, "I was about to ask you the same thing." Joker bragged that he created a god-tier drug specifically to take down the general, a power meant to rival the ancient dragons themselves. Despite hearing that, Ansal bluntly stated that Joker still has a mountain of training ahead of him. Clenching his fists for one last strike, the Joker forces his body to absorb the juice to make his muscles explode. But the gains weren't natural. His body was literally collapsing from a massive drug overdose. Backing away in a panic, He realized he needed the off-cycle neutralizer immediately or his heart would pop. Our protagonist just watched, wondering what kind of nasty bootleg stuff his enemy had been injecting. In seconds, the Joker's body completely mutated. He looked like a melting candle made of meat. Gripped by a sudden, violent sickness, he began puking out a glowing green sludge. Ansel figured it was just a nutritional deficiency or a bad protein shake. But his internal system quickly popped up a notification saying, "Nope, it's way worse." After puking his guts out, the Joker shrunk back into his true form, a frail, withered man who looked like he had 1 foot in the grave. With hands shaking like a leaf, the Joker reached for another dose, but for the first time, he felt true, cold dread. He finally asked himself the ultimate question: why the hell did I pick a fight with this gym monster? Trying to negotiate his way out, he told Ansel that maybe they should just agree to disagree. He started rambling about how life is too beautiful for such unnecessary violence. Walking forward with a heavy shadow over his eyes, Ansel nodded and said, "I totally agree. I don't want to keep fighting you either." But Joker was the one who pulled the trigger on this chaos, and now he's about to reap the whirlwind. This senseless war forced everyone to skip their gym sessions, and that reality has fueled our protagonist's absolute rage. Joker grovels, begging for forgiveness. He never dreamed things would spiral this far out of control. Now, paralyzed by fear, he only cares about saving Elisa. Looking down at the pathetic villain shivering in the dirt, Ansel starts to wonder just who this mystery woman is. Joker chokes out that every sin he committed, every drop of blood spilled, was all for her. The scene shifts. A cinematic flashback begins with a lone crow perched ominously atop a wooden post. Joker laments that the girl is gone, murdered by the very people of this town, and his entire crusade was nothing but a blood-soaked quest for vengeance. Desperate and cornered, Joker lunges for one last hidden syringe filled with the experimental serum. This strain of the drug is pure agony, designed to warp the mind and shatter the limits of the flesh. It's basically the Trenbolone of the underworld. He almost surrendered for a heartbeat, but the darkness won out as he slammed the needle into his vein. He plans to burn through his remaining life force to end this clash right here and now, determined to tear our protagonist apart with his bare hands. But the moment the mutation starts to ripple through his muscles, the gears of fate grind to a halt. All of Joker's newfound bravado evaporates instantly as he gazes up at the sky in total shock, witnessing a sight that Elisa never could have prepared for. In the depths of the forest, her legend had finally been eclipsed. This triggers another unexpected dive into the past. It all started 32 years ago, within the high walls of the castle where young soldiers once honed their blades. Amidst the clashing steel, a young scholar sat in perfect silence, lost in the pages of his book. That was a 17-year-old Joker. He looked up and asked his companion why the people of this land were born with such pitiful mana reserves. Young Guido shrugged, having no clue. This kid is the future feudal lord, though his younger self is almost unrecognizable. Joker reminded him that as the next in line to rule, he really ought to pay attention to these world-changing discoveries. But the young lord-to-be was too addicted to the grind, knowing his nerdy friend would ramble about his findings regardless of who was listening. Finally catching his breath after a brutal set of drills, the young lord agreed to hear out the theory. Joker explained that mana isn't like raw muscle. It's a fickle, sensitive energy that flows best when emotions are high. But in their kingdom, the culture is so frigid and the rules so strict that children are taught to bury their feelings deep inside. Because they've stifled their hearts, their mana cores never truly awaken. The young lord scoffed, calling that energy a mage's curse, insisting that raw physical dominance was their true heritage. Joker teased that he sounded just like a boring politician, a low blow, considering nobody likes a suit. The young lord laughed it off and told his friend to put down the dusty scrolls. It was time for some real work, tossing him a wooden practice, sort of like a challenge. Joker smirked and stood up, ready to play along. Seconds later, they were a blur of motion. Despite his scholarly appearance, Joker was a prodigy with a wooden blade, quickly putting the future ruler on the defensive. However, the young version of the old man was a powerhouse of pure stamina, eventually spotting a split-second opening in the bespectacled youth guard. After taking a flurry of heavy hits, Joker lost his footing and crashed to the grass. Chalk up another win for the young lord, 123 victories to Joker's 43. As they caught their breath, a shadow fell over them. It was their mentor and the future commander of the realm, Lady Ryan. Honestly, her name changes more often than the seasons in this recap. Ryan walked over, telling Joker he had the gift but lacked the engine to keep up, though the boy insisted he hated the way of the sword. But she just smiled, promising that one day he'd realize its worth. He just needed to stop making excuses and train. She pointed to the young lord, who was clearly in his element, thriving on every drop of sweat. Yet, in classic Sunder fashion, he tried to deny it. He claimed the training was a chore, even as he reached for his sword for another round. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the air like a knife, declaring that Joker was a lost cause with zero talent. That stinging insult didn't sit well with either of the boys. Distracted by the sudden intrusion, Ryan realized she hadn't introduced the new girl. From now on, their trio was becoming a quartet. This was her star pupil, Elisa, a girl who looked every bit the part of a legendary warrior in the making. Radiating pure arrogance, Elisa boasted she could take both boys on at the same time without breaking a sweat. Insulted, the two boys decided to humble this newcomer together. But Elisa was more than ready to shatter their confidence into pieces. She loathed being underestimated because of her gender and charged them like a predatory beast. The young lord and Joker quickly realized they had bitten off more than they could chew. This girl was a monster on the field. After the education session, the young lord found himself smiling despite the bruises. Joker panted, admitting she was terrifyingly strong. The young lord could only nod in shell-shocked agreement. But as he watched her, he realized she was nothing like the stiff nobles of the court. He couldn't quite name it, but this commoner girl had a magnetic, almost otherworldly beauty that left him breathless. Lying in the grass after his defeat, Joker began to talk about a new ambition. He declared right then and there that he was going to marry her. The young lord froze in shock, as the exact same thought had just crossed his mind. Joker noticed the weird vibe and asked if he had a problem, and the future lord muttered that his dream might be a bit too ambitious. After all, Elisa had made it clear she only had eyes for warriors who could beat her, and Joker was currently a bottom-tier duelist. But Joker just fired up, vowing to double his training and become the fiercest fighter in the land just to win her heart. True to their word, the two friends pushed each other to the limit, and slowly, the gap in their scores began to close. Joker's transformation was real. He ground his way up to 92 wins. Eventually, his obsession with the grind paid off, and he flipped the script, becoming the undisputed king of the training yard. After a long losing streak, the young lord was lost. He couldn't understand how he'd fallen behind so fast. Elisa, watching from the sidelines, invited the young lord for a private sparring session. But his ego was bruised, and he felt like he was just a shadow of his former self. He made up a lame excuse about being bogged down by regional politics to avoid the shame of losing again. Back home, his father was a nightmare. He'd allowed the boy to train, but he couldn't stand that his son was losing to lesser youths. The young lord tried to argue that maybe he just wasn't built for combat, but his father wasn't having it. The old man smashed a wine glass against his son's face, screaming that he didn't want to hear excuses. He only had one heir, and the kid was proving to be a total failure. This was Lord Leonardo, with wine and blood dripping down his chin. The young prince could only bow and apologize to his father's majesty. Later that night, the heavens opened up in a torrential downpour. The young lord sat alone in the rain, drowning in his own self-pity. A voice called out, warning the prince he'd catch his death out there, but he just stared into the dark and said he was fine. Elisa stepped into the light, calling him out on his obvious lie. She told him it was impossible to say everything's fine when his face was the picture of absolute misery. Since he clearly didn't know how to have a good time, she decided to drag him along on one of her wild adventures. As they wandered the city, the young lord was mesmerized. This girl wore a smile like it was the easiest thing in the world. He started to wonder if she was truly this happy just because he was the one by her side. A spark of hope flickered in his chest. Maybe her heart wasn't set on Joker after all. If he was the one she chose, he'd be the luckiest man alive in this entire kingdom. The next morning at the castle, the gossip mill was working overtime. Word was spreading that Joker had finally confessed his love to Elisa, only to get shot down in flames. Hearing this, the young lord felt a surge of adrenaline, thinking his path to her was finally clear. He set off to find Elisa, convinced that the stars were finally aligning in his favor. Wrapped up in his own romantic ideals, he ran toward her with his heart on his sleeve. He was ready to risk it all, even willing to turn his back on his royal bloodline if it meant being with her. In his mind, she was all he needed to be whole. But the moment he reached her doorstep, the young lord's world came crashing down. Peeking through the window, he witnessed a scene that shattered his heart into a million pieces. Panic and bile rose in his throat as the crushing weight of rejection hit him. He saw Elisa, but she wasn't alone. His soul curdled with pure hatred as he saw the man holding her. It was Joker. And that's where we'll leave it for now. How do you like that twist? I thought it was absolute fire. If you want to see the fallout in the next part, smash that subscribe button and drop a like on the video. Catch you in the next recap, everyone. Stay tuned.